Welcome to this episode of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS. And the Seahawks have a game remaining left on their schedule, but it feels like Black Monday around here. Feels like the end of the season as the Seahawks now eliminated from playoff contention due to the strength of victory tiebreaker that they will lose to the Rams even if they beat them at SoFi on Sunday. Brandon Kane of the Hawks Nest is going to be joining me, a rescheduled live broadcast today. Get his thoughts on where the Seahawks team is today, where he thinks they're headed, and what the biggest offseason priorities are. And yes, we will get to all your questions about certain personnel moves. Thanks for joining me. I'm Dan. This is Seahawks Forever. Let's go.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever Podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hey, look who's here. It's Brandon Kane in the Hawks Nest. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. As you said, it's a bit of a Black Monday kind of feel to it, but ultimately it's been a pretty good season, so I feel okay at the end of the day by all accounts. It'd be nice to be fighting out at the end of this week, but is what it is on that one.
Yeah, it's weird, right? I woke up today it's over, and we're not used to it being over early. We're usually in the hunt right up until the last weekend, but we just couldn't get the help we needed yesterday. And ultimately, let's address the elephant in the room first, because this is what all the fans want to talk about today. Seahawks had their opportunities this season to change the entire course of how this thing looked, and they just didn't take advantage of those opportunities. As you sit here today, how do you feel about this team at the end of Mike Macdonald's first season?
Well, it's sort of two main emotions that pull back at me on this one. And I think that it's the kind of the important part about what the organization does going into this offseason, which is that the first year under Mike Macdonald has been a successful season. You've won more games than even Vegas had you outlooted, or first-time coach, or changing over a new coach who's been here for 14 years. I mean, it's hard to see that you were going to necessarily be able to win more games than you lost with all that was going to need to have to go down for that to kind of occur. And he's pulled that off. So it's been a successful season. He looks like the right head coach for us for the now and in the long term to potentially take us back to the mountaintop. But that's a separate thing to me than the question that then is posed on the other side of this. And the question that's posed on the other side of this is, are the Seahawks ready to contend? Are they close to contending? And I think that this is very important, because these are the things that are going to then instruct the moves you then make, and that you've got to first figure that part out before you kind of can get to the moves that you're going to make. And in my opinion, when looking at that secondary part, and this is a part that I don't think fans want to hear a lot about, Dan, but this is in the name of being honest, and just this is what I'm seeing with it. I don't see a team that's ready for 2025 unless, can a Viking thing happen? Because this is what Vikings did it. Can the anomaly happen? Can the ones, versus the other teams that were legitimate coming into this year that you knew were contenders, like your Bills, your Eagles, your Lions? We can go down through the list, the name of these teams, but you knew coming into this season those were going to be teams who could make some noise, not just in the playoffs, but even to go and push for a Super Bowl. And I don't see us in that place. And so I'm informed by that a little bit, and what I want to see the team to do from a move standpoint, which is just a little bit less urgency, I think. One more point on this is I think it's very important to do this as well, because I think we can look at the team in recent years, and that self-assessment point that I'm talking about here, Dan, they've gotten it wrong. They've looked at themselves in house and said, no, we're right there on the edge. We're right there, man. We're ready to go. And so this is about course correcting as well as your own internal look at your organization.
That's a great point. I think we're going to find out quickly how they view themselves in that light, because I do think you're right. I think, the way Pete Carroll was wired was, we're going to get there. We're almost there. I mean, we just stay the course. Everything's fine. And it would, I think, prevent them from making some of the major moves that they probably needed to make on a few of the last off seasons, or the moves that they thought were major and impactful. Jamal Adams being the biggest example of that, just were wrong and misguided. I think we're going to find out quickly. And what makes me feel that way, I keep going back to this, but when everything was falling off the rails and the defense couldn't stop a nosebleed, and especially after that Bills game when they're just getting blown 5-10 yards off the line of scrimmage in that game, and they just couldn't even compete defensively, the swiftness and the deliberate manner in which Mike Macdonald made it known he needed to change out his linebacker group, and how dramatic of a change that was, and ultimately it worked. I see Mike Macdonald and the way he's wired as he's going to take that approach to the entire roster and go into John Schneider's office and be and be very adamant about what he needs and what he feels like he wants and has to have for this team to play in the image that he has professed to us he wants it to play in. I don't think it's going to take long for us to recognize which direction they're going to go. Do you?
I don't. But again, it's a team that's been pushed, and you mentioned Carroll's influence, which could have been a part of this, and maybe that's a bit of the changing of ways, but it is Schneider still in there. And, even this coming into this year, while there wasn't necessarily that Jamal Adams-like trade, you also didn't necessarily do things that probably in retrospect might have been smart to do so. Like, for instance, maybe saving more than just the $8 million in cap space and actually looking at a way of kind of being able to roll some of that in the next year, and that was off the table because you were kind of pushing the 1-year deals and you're kind of, let's just try to see, and so do you feel the same way though, too, as well? Do you feel that this is a team right now that you look at next year's schedule with some of the opponents and it looks like an easier schedule on the surface of it, but where do you stand on that as far as, is this team ready to truly contend next year or not?
I think they're much closer to that than the alternative. And I think that this defense, I'm a believer in this defense. I think what they did really going into the bye, we saw it after the trade for Ernest Jones. That transformation on defense started with that first Rams game. Unfortunately, a loss, or we'd be having a whole different conversation here today. But I think that defense is sustainable long term. I think we'll talk about some of the actual nuts and bolts of it and the specifics and the personnel there, who comes back, who doesn't. But I think that's sustainable. That's fixed. And I think as long as you can play defense in this league and slow teams down, you've got a shot. It's the inconsistencies on the other side of the ball that we're going to dig into, and we need to fix some of those. I do think that, and I've
you got to make a choice. You got to make a call on this because you're a little on the fence on this one. So you got to say, am I going to damn the torpedoes? You got $3 million of functional cap space coming into this offseason. So, I'm talking about, you're going to have to make aggressive moves if we're in the likeness of thinking they're ready to contend. That's really, we come back to, again, this has been a mistake they've made time and time again. So I want to get from you, where do you stand on doing that? On, hey, I'm going to take that patient approach, not go fall in on the money spend, or I'm going to really say, yeah, I have faith that this team's going to be able to contend next year.
Okay. If that's the choice you're giving me, I'm on the optimistic side. I think they're closer than many of the fan base are willing to admit right now. And I don't want to see big dramatic swings this offseason. I don't want to be trading first round draft picks. I don't think they're as far away as some of the naysayers out there believe that they are, because I think that I already talked about the defense. I think on offense, I think we've checked some boxes in the last 6 weeks. I think there's more pieces in place on that offensive line that you can win with now than there were 6, 8, 10 weeks ago. And this idea that you need to draft all offensive linemen in the offseason or go out and sign Trey Smith or it's a failed offseason, I don't believe that. I think you're a player or two and some continuity away.
That's totally fair. I want to make sure, because it's one of those ones where you don't get to make that decision tacitly. So you don't get to make it in a way of just, well, I'd kind of like to just see if they develop and another move here. And then I think that it's because you only have that $3 million of cap space. There's a real decision-making process here where if the front office is going to take that approach, you're pulling from 26, you're pulling from 27 to make this year happen then.
Right.
And my advocacy on this is just that I'm not as strongly in that place. It could happen, but I just feel like that right now, again, understanding that part of what's set this organization back in recent years has been kind of taking that approach time and time again when you weren't ready to make that big leap. And it ended up costing long term.
Yeah, I agree with you on that sense. I don't think we can see another. And as far as the cap space thing goes, we'll get into that. But there's so many levers they can pull to easily free up a bunch of money without impacting the roster negatively, in my opinion. But I do think that, John's MO the last couple of off seasons has been, just patchwork and Band-Aids and the 1-year deals and the mid veterans, right? That you're given, 1-year guaranteed money to, and that sucks up your cap space worse than anything. I don't think he can do that this offseason. I'd rather see more quantity, less quantity. I think the roster doesn't have as many glaring holes this year as it did last year. And there's tons of young talent spread throughout the roster. I think you need to target and add a couple impactful players as opposed to last year's free agency approach where you bring in 10, 11, 12, 13 guys and none of them really made a big impact. You can't have another offseason like that. You need those roles filled. You can do it at the bottom of free agency in June or in the draft. Let's get some impact in here. But I just don't believe that you have to that you have to tear it all down, right? You've heard from fans. There's fans out there that want to do all the things on the list. They want to get rid of DK. Or trade DK. They want to get rid of Gino. They want to fire Ryan Grubb. They want to draft 3 offensive linemen. They want to do it all.
Yeah. Well,
we need to talk about each of those individually, right? We need to deconstruct that, but that's crazy. That gets you in the top 5 in the draft, which maybe ultimately is what some of those fans really wish for.
Well, and I'm not fully advocating for pushing on that in any way, but what I am advocating for is that I think that this team needs to get shaken up here, Dan. We've been middle of the road for a while here. My belief is that the worst place that you can get in the NFL is not being a bad team, but being stuck in between.
Absolutely.
And the place that teams get stuck in between, how do they do it? They all talk themselves every year into being better than they really are. And when you get stuck there, you get stuck there for decades. Yeah. And while we haven't been here for decades right now, I think when I backtrack and pull on that thread, I come to the conclusion on this that you just misassess yourself as much as anything of where your team truly is at. And I think that this is, again, you mentioned about moving levers. Yeah, you can move levers, but you've got to decide on giving a contract extension to Gino Smith. This whole thinking that he's going to ride out on the final year of his deal is a pipe dream. It's not happening. You're going to have to either move him or put him on an extension. DK Metcalf, the same kind of way. You either got to move him or put him on an extension. And if you in my honest opinion with this, DK, if you're not really ready to if you really look at yourself in house and make that proper assessment and come away going, we are about a year out. And now we are talking about DK being 29 years old, maybe by the time we're really truly able to compete or contend. Well, it's not that I'm pushing for it to happen, but I am pushing for every possibility to be on the table here because I think that has not been on the table in recent years past. And if we're going to correct this thing and if we're going to fix it and we're going to shake ourselves out because everybody gets stuck in between, doesn't do that thing. When you look at them, you go, why are they stuck there? Because they won't shake themselves out. They always just kind of but next year, Saints with their 70 million, the Cowboys, year in and year out in the process they go about. You find yourself here over and over again. So I'm very aware of that. And that's got me more open here again with those contracts on it. You mentioned levers. Those levers are there, but that money gets eaten really fast when some of these big deals get handed out.
It does. And this will be yet another second offseason with Joey Lane pulling the strings on the contracts. It seems like he's convinced John Schneider, or maybe it was Schneider's intent all along, to be a little more open-minded about being a little more aggressive in how they structure some of those contracts so that you can get some things taken care of immediately. I think the first big domino that needs to fall and will fall, and I've said it here for the last couple of weeks, I don't think it's going to take long. I think it might happen the next day if it happens. And we've seen a history here in Seattle, even under Pete Carroll, of coordinator changes. Where do you stand on Ryan Grubb, and do you think they make a change there?
I think it's another one like all these things on the team a little bit. You get torn a little bit, where I could kind of go either way with this and be fine with it if they wanted to run it back. John Schneider put an offensive line in front of this offensive coordinator who's got a big part of his passing attack is going to want to push the ball downfield. Didn't make a lot of sense doing that. Having a run blocking line with guys like Lincoln and Bradford starting you off the rip from the interior of the line versus pass blockers, probably not too smart within that either. So you didn't really set him up for success with this offensive line as bad as it's been throughout the course of this year. And there's something to that. At the same point in time, there's been things within Grubb's game that had bothered me. His inability to seem to understand that he needs to run the ball consistently and not just to get away from it at every quick turn. The predilection to the 7-step drops. And when you don't have the line to get it done, hey, read the room, buddy. You don't have the line to get this done. So start working off some of the shorter kind of concepts here to make this work. So there's some things there that are still kind of not been great with him on that side for me, and I've not been blown away by him on it. But I'm not really pushed on this one way or the other with him necessarily, because again, there's certainly a cogent argument to be made that he's not been given a good enough line to run his offense. You hire a guy to run his offense, and you go, well, I don't like your 7-step. Well, you hired him for the 7-step drops. It's your failure, not his, on there that you didn't supply him the way that he wants to run his offense.
I've been open-minded throughout the year, mostly because I really like him. I like hearing him talk about football and offense, and you can see his affinity for the downfield passing game and his aptitude for it. It's just when you start to think you're seeing progress, and last week was the best example. First drive of the game on Thursday night against Chicago, they're ramming the football right down the Bears' throats. They're running it physically with 2 different running backs, and they're doing it between the tackles like we've wanted to see. I think it was 48 yards rushing on that first drive, and then they get 3rd and 3 on the 9, and he goes empty. So you take away the threat of the run, and you just let the Bears know you're going to throw the football, and it ends up being a field goal instead of a touchdown. So 20 straight games now without a first drive touchdown. Certain guys are wired differently. And I'm just not sure. Like, we've seen the reaction and sometimes the overreaction in the case of that first, that second, was it the second Niners game where he came out and just ran the football to a fault?
Yeah.
Where it was just, it was first and second down run, third down throw.
It's kind of like a middle finger to the fans on
yeah. Or maybe
this?
I mean, he hears it all week, right? We got to run the football more. We got to get it to Walker more. And it was like, okay, well, here you go. Here's what it looks like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if he's wired, if he can reprogram himself. It's like I heard a term, I think it was on the Thursday night game, from one of the announcers where he talked about it. Oh, it was the Minnesota game. It was Mark Sanchez talking about Sam Darnold and how he had a software download when he went to Minnesota, and you can see he's a different player. I feel like Ryan Grubb is in need of a software download. I just don't think he's wired that way to where he can feel comfortable leaning into the run. He'll do it if he's told or if he thinks the situation really dictates it, but I don't think he likes doing it. And I don't know if you can change someone's nature. If that's the way Mike McDonald wants to play, I don't know if that's a fit.
I don't know either. And I think I have the same instinct here on this, where it's just I don't know if this is a correctable deal, because it slapped him in the face so many different times over and over again. You've got the gap run stuff that you run with the Cardinals on that game on the road where Charbonnet has a breakout game. He looks great, right? And then you come back the next week, you come back and we might have run like one gap, and it was the 27-yarder for Charbonnet for the touchdown the week after that. And I don't know if we ran gap at all last week. I don't remember seeing it very much, if but at all. When you would think at a normal offensive coordinator in that moment, who you struggle to find any running game, here we've got something that works.
Yeah.
We've got the personnel to run it. I'd be hammering it 24/7. I thought the tunnel screens, we've had issues with finding things that consistently work offensively. Yet, hey, the tunnel screen works. I'll go to that thing 7-8 times a game. If you're struggling to find stuff, work with the stuff that does work and make them stop it. Get them to the point of actually stopping it. Don't just make yourself go away from it just voluntarily, and you sort of never force them to. And I think just with the predictability in the running game, defensive coordinators are too smart. They're way too smart. And if you become this predictable as an offense, this predictable as far as your the way you'll lean towards, they will be able to have a huge advantage over you pre-snap. And we've seen that, right? You've seen moments this year with the run game where it's like, dude, do they know exactly what the run play is and where it's going? Because you're watching guys prior to the snap firing towards the gap. I mean, running like hell. You meant the Niner game and the first game where you had DeMondre Lamore as an outside corner. You're running an A-gap power run, and he ends up off the outside into the A gap, making the tackle at the line of scrimmage. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I've seen that a lot with Grubb this year.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the big stuff that I'm sure most of the people in the questions and comment section want to talk about. Where do you stand on Gino Smith and how they should handle his contract and his roster spot, to be frank, this offseason?
Well, that's where we come back to what we started at the show for me on this, which is that I'm informed by my outlook of the team. And my outlook of the team is that if I'm going to say that we're going to be a contender, I'm not going to say, well, I think we're kind of maybe. If the stars align with the moon and, we do a ritual out in the middle of the Mount Rainier, then we'll get ourselves to a contender. No, I want to be able to say, I know we're as close as we can be doing contender and ready when I'm in. And if I'm signing Gino to this kind of deal, I need to know I'm a contender. I don't play the game of, well, but not him, then who? I hate that game. It's the same game people played with Carroll. How are you going to let go of Carroll? If you let go of Carroll, then who else are you going to go to? Well, who else is the guy you're going to have run the team then? That's not the way to make decisions on players or coaches, right? And it's all of the factors in play. I tend to find there's a bit of a draw in times, Dan, in football to go to the simplified. Rather than this is an eminently complicated sport with a lot of moving parts, let's just get down to the simplified thing like that. Well, but not, then who? I don't like that. So I am informed by the fact that I don't have that unbridled faith in next year being this year of contention. I think, Gino, if you're signing him to a contract extension, it has to be number one that you're looking at that saying you are ready to contend next year. It makes no sense to me to sign a guy in his mid-30s if I don't think in 2026 that I'm good to go, especially for even somewhat of a discount at whatever, $42.5 million per year or whatever it would be. So I'm at this point of a guy that would say I can't do it because I'm not ready to compete. It's nothing to do about Gino. This will be a little bit like the DK stuff when we talk about this stuff. It's not really informed necessarily by the individual player, but by the timing of where the team is at and how ready they are to go.
And that's what scares me, because this is one area where you and I aren't in perfect alignment. I am about, like, if you're going to move off a guy like Gino, that's a good quarterback, and good quarterbacks are hard to find. then you damn well better have a plan for what you're going to do next. And the alternatives out there are scary. And that's one thing I caution fans about. Just the word just, is such a minimizer, and it's something that I hate, but just draft a guy, just cut him, just because the alternative can be really dark and scary, and it can keep you drafting in the top 10 for years to come. And so that concerns me. And the Seahawks usually don't operate in that sense. They operate more of what you're talking about with the big picture, like where do we view ourselves? And if indeed John Schneider and Mike McDonald, if they're sitting in a room all by themselves and they look at each other in the eyes and they go, we're 2 years away, man. So let's try to find another younger guy. Let's get rid of that contract. Let's do some other things because we're 2 years away. That's cool. And if they have conviction on that, then I'm all for it. But based on some of the language we heard last year when the change was made at head coach, I'm not sure ownership would allow them to think that way, because they made it very clear. John Schneider made it very clear that it had been handed down from Jody Allen and Burt Cold and the powers that be in the Seahawks organization that we're not interested in a rebuild. We want to contend. We want to win now. So let's keep this thing afloat. Are you concerned at all that might dictate some of the offseason approach from the front office, where maybe in their heart of hearts, they might want to go another direction?
I'm worried if ownership comes down and says that, because that's, again, not being done then intelligently, right? That's somebody coming in with some mandate that's just kind of a blind mandate, not based on where you really are as a team. And you're taking power away from your general manager to make that assessment if you're making that assessment as a committee. So I would not be happy to hear that. I don't really think that it adds up to the top 10 every year thing. You've not been there organizationally for a very long time. You have ownership committed to spending money. Bad organizations end up in the top 10 over and over again, not ones that decide to pivot off a quarterback who's in his mid-30s. And here's the thing with Gino is that this is not a 27-year-old guy. This guy's going to be 35 next October. And I know that this Tom Brady thing and Peyton Manning thing of these guys playing into their 40s has people kind of thinking a little bit of these guys can play forever. And everybody likes to say, well, Gino doesn't have as much tread taking off his tires. Well, guess what? Gino's been injured both of the last 2 years. He's going to end up this year hobbled up. Now, is it part of the pass protection? Yeah, but he's not getting healthier going into the future on this. And for every Peyton Manning there is, or maybe even a Tom Brady, there are those guys like we're seeing, like Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins, that fall off that cliff once they get into their mid-30s.
Yeah,
and so this is
quick too. It's like when
it happens. You blink your eyes and it's done. So
like when you lose that bat speed. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not an anti-Gino guy. I'm a pro-Gino guy, but we got to be real with this conversation on this of where he's at and what's likely to go into that future point. So, I think that when it comes to that, this isn't a decision. If he was at 30 years old, it'd be easier. If it was 3 years ago, it'd be easier. Yeah. But that's not the case to me. And I just think when I factor all that in, I go, yeah, I don't think so. There's not been enough for me to want to take that risk. The team's not quite good enough to go do that. And I think that, this is that thing I say about shaking this up here. Dan, this is the point, is that those teams in between, what do they make? What's the decision they make in this situation, in your opinion? You're an in-between team, and you're looking at this Gino Smith, just like what you said. Yeah. Do you think that in-between team signs him to an extension? Or do you think that team pivots off, even though if it might hurt a little bit in the interim, to make the right decision for the long term?
If I'm running the team, I'm looking for a way to, because here's the thing. I don't think Gino Smith has any leverage, first of all. And so this idea that because he's played on a mid contract the last couple of years, and he's played well in most instances, that he's now deserving of something closer to the top of the market. I don't think he has any leverage. I think if he hit the open market as a free agent, maybe someone gives him $40 million a year, but I don't know. Maybe he gets the Kirk Cousins deal. I'm not sure. Maybe teams will be a little more cautious now because they see what happened with Cousins, although there was a major injury involved there. So maybe it's not apples to apples. If I'm the Seahawks, because of what I said earlier, because I do think they're closer to contending than they are to not, especially with there's a window of opportunity here in the division that they play in, I think, over the next couple of years, that I'm looking to sign him to a very similar deal again, kind of a rolling contract where you can get out of it sort of at any time, but I'm keeping him in-house. And then I start drafting a guy every damn year at some point in the draft, like John Schneider's been telling us for 14 years he wants to, and he learned to, and he watched Ron Wolf do it. But the draft just doesn't fall my way. We'll make it fall your way and start taking shots on guys. And unfortunately this year, I don't think you can take that shot in the first round because there's no one that really slots in the lower half of the first round. Things can change, obviously, between now and April. But there's some intriguing guys on day 2 and later, and you just have to start taking shots at guys or guys off the street. Some of these highly drafted guys that have failed, and maybe they can be the next Sam Darnold or Gino Smith, and maybe you start giving some of those guys a shot. We'll at least find out. And I think that's what they did with Sam Howell, is they took a shot, and I think by all accounts, it sure seems like maybe they're not as high on him as they had hoped. And maybe they'll even move off of him. It sure seems like they like Jaron Hall in some respects, but they took a shot. And maybe they move off him this year and they try another guy, right? Whoever it might be in the draft, until you get it right. Because if you just cut Gino on Monday, for example, because you don't want to pay him, the bonus, what is it, February, that they have to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Then you leave yourselves in a potential world of hurt, because
that's where, again, though, you come back. I think you're looking through the outlook of it, not wrongly so, by the way. I think this is where that you have the outlook of it that they're ready to go in 25. So, you're looking at going, okay, well, we don't have but if you don't have that outlook, and if you're looking at the team on it, that's not a scary proposition. I also think when you talk about the leverage thing, we know that Gino's people wanted to be paid in training camp. We know they were pushing for that in training camp.
Right.
You talk about, well, is there going to be people or not? Well, you mentioned it. 2 quarterbacks going in the first round, right? That's it.
Yeah.
So that means that you're going to have about 6-7 teams that need a QB. Sam Darnold's your only real quarterback on the open market who's probably going to get his starting job with an NFL team into the future. So
I don't think he's hitting the market, to be honest.
Well, I mean, okay. So he doesn't hit the market. That takes even more than that, even helps Gino out more then, right? So, a team like, let's say the Raiders, for instance, they're picking, I think, 8th overall. They're out of the Cam Ward sweepstakes. They're out of the Shedeur Sanders sweepstakes, probably, unless they're going to be able to trade up. And so there's a team right there that goes, Aiden O'Connell. Probably don't want to roll with that into the future. Probably not going to want to take the guy in the first round. We're also not really ready as a team. Do we want to bring in maybe a Gino guy as a stopgap guy there until we can have time to get around to getting our quarterback, or we want to run it with an Aiden again? And we'll give him a 3-year, $40 million. And we'll throw Seattle a 4th round pick for him. If Gino's people pushes, what I'm saying is that's the leverage that Gino's people would then have to say, you don't want to pay us, okay, but we have a team out here who would be willing to pay us if you take and flip us over there. And that's what I think will show up because of the scarcity that's there at the position this offseason.
Yeah. And this Gino, it's so polarizing. I don't really understand it. I try to, like, why people get so mad and why they attack if you're on one side or the other. It almost kind of reminds me of the last presidential election. It's like I have been attacked online because I have dared suggest that Gino's a good quarterback and they should stick with him for the time being. It's this black or white, all or nothing kind of approach. But I mean, anyone who's watched my show or listened to me for any length of time knows how much I love the building process and the behind the scenes and the off season and everything that happens in the VMAC and outside the lines. That, if they announce next Monday that they've released Gino Smith or that they've traded him, then I'll be as energized as anyone, because, okay, now what's the process? Here we go. What are we going to do? So, if whatever they do, I just want them to do it with conviction, and I want to see it early in the offseason. Last year, we kind of got that, granted, or 2 years ago when he was due for the extension. There was that whole it was kind of mysterious on whether they were going to, you remember that after the first year, whether they were going to pick up that one, the bonus in February, and Schneider's word, he was being very vague about whether they supported him or not. And there were whispers at the combine that maybe they were trying to shop him around. Like, come out and support him or don't. Make a move or don't. I want to see that kind of conviction this offseason, regardless of which direction it is.
Yeah, I think that's completely, I'd be in the same camp of it. I want to see this team coming out with something that feels like we're not straddling the fence. We're picking a lane. The fork is here in the road. We're taking the fork and we're going the way. And if they want to be in the contending status, I'll say to the other side of it, even though I'm not advocating for it, you're going to need to hammer this thing hard this offseason then, Dan. That's your outlook of it. It's not just going to happen by the maturation process of the youngsters.
Right.
And this team can't operate from that assumption, again, being that that's been one that they've operated from that assumption in prior years. It's going to take you actually taking some tangible moves out here to get this done. It's not to say that it's the impossible feat, but it will take maximum aggression. It'll take what you're talking about, having a pinpoint mechanism that clicks into place in what you're doing and go. So I'd like to see the same thing on it. I'm, again, not anti-Gino, by the way. You're right to support him. I've been a supporter of him. This decision is much more influenced by just merely where the state of the team is and where I think they're going to into the next year than it is anything else. I think even the issues that have come up this year with him on the interceptions and the red zone interceptions, they have a lot to do with him trying to play essentially Superman, because he's asked to a lot of times over the past couple of years, and also the cumulative effect of taking a pounding game in and game out at the quarterback position and what that does to players. Every quarterback, doesn't matter Gino or anybody else, is going to get eroded and diminished when you put them in that environment over and over and over again.
Now, DK is a little bit of a different story, and I've gone back and forth on the DK situation, and mainly where I come from is I want him on my football team. Like he's the kind of guy you want on your football team. I like the style with which he plays football. I've seen guys interact with him. The guys on the team look to him. He's a leader. He's an alpha. They love him. He makes big, tough physical catches in big moments. I get the other side of the argument, though. I understand that people want more from him, especially when there's a price tag attached to it. I've always been of the belief that I don't care what a guy's making. I honestly don't, as long as the GM can fit it all together and you put a good football team on the field. So push comes to shove, I want DK Metcalf on my team. However, we saw a couple of games without DK Metcalf, and it wasn't as tragic as we had feared. In fact, JSN had his career game while he was out and was easily featured, and that was exciting. Wide receivers, in a very general sense, pretty easy to find. Solid wide receivers. You can find them under any nook and cranny, free agency, minor trades. Where do you stand on DK Metcalf, and is he more valuable to the Seahawks for 2025 as a player on the field or as an asset?
Definitely one that I'm torn on with you too. He's been my favorite player on the team in these past few years. But I'm a guy that preaches that we're not about sacred cows, and that this is about the team and what is necessary to make the team great, not individual players. We celebrate the individual players, but this is the team that we're looking at, and it's a team that's not won recently. We've got one playoff win since 2017. We're middle of the road, and that's with DK's presence in here for the last 5-6 years. I look at the receivers that are going to get paid in the market of where he's going to be paid, and make no mistake about it, we're talking $33 million is the floor. That's the floor.
Yeah.
And if you're paying guys that mark, when I look across the league at the guys that are going to make that kind of money, they're on the back of offenses that are cooking, offenses that are some of the better in the league. So that when you're paying that money, you're getting the sort of full returns on that. It's not that it's all just on the receiver or not, but you tend to want to see that with it. And with DK on the surface of this, can't say you're getting necessarily prolific production for him. A lot of people, even the supporters, are going to tell me, well, it's the double teams he takes. It's like you say, the leadership, the ferocity he plays with. Well, outside of that 1,300-yard season, he averages about 1,000 yards a year. So a 17-game schedule. That's pretty much what he gets you year in and year out. Probably what he's going to get you into the future. And I go, $33 million. Yeah, that's tough. I'd ask you, Dan, do you feel like his game's really come hugely forward from when he walked in the door here in this organization in 2019? It's come forward, but has he really developed and advanced his skill set in that time frame?
No, I feel like it's plateaued the last couple of years. Like, he is who he is. And you know exactly what you're getting and what you're going to pay for. And that comes with a lot of highs and a lot of lows and some pluses and minuses. There's the tantrums that happen occasionally, not as often this year. We just saw the first one last week, but it's a concern still. There's the routes where he's accused of, cutting them off earlier or being lazy on it. The 49er game, this last game. And you can debate those things on all 22 and nitpick him or whatever, but they're still there, and they shouldn't be there after all this time. It's more of a, like, he's such an enticing talent, right? But you can see why another team might be enticed too. Like, he's the guy in college you want getting off the bus first, right? You want the other team to see that dude getting off the bus. Yeah. But also, as much as I have an affinity for him as you do yourself, when I'm being really honest with myself, I ask myself, like, why it can't be more. He leaves me wanting more. And I don't just want to offload him for the sake of offloading him. And I don't know that the wide receiver market, I don't know that, AJ Brown might be the last wide receiver ever traded for a first round pick. I just don't know. Maybe
I'm not so sure.
Maybe this is the year, though, because we keep hearing it's not a good draft overall. Teams might not value those first round picks as much as they have in the past. Also, it's not as good a wide receiver class. We've seen 4 or 5 like outstanding ones in a row. And this year there's 2 or 3 guys in the first round, but it kind of falls off after that. Maybe this is the year where a team kind of at the back half of the first round wants to give you a first and more. If the right deal's there, I'm making it. I've come around on that. I've changed my mind on that.
I feel with a lot of certainty that you're going to get the first round pick. McMillan out of Arizona State is really the only guy that looks true blue, like your only first round wide receiver in this class, to my eyes. I've got to obviously dive deeper into it. I tend to be pretty closely aligned on this one as far as, pick these guys out for at least being in the first round, maybe not where they go. Yeah. But there's a lot of slot guys. There's a lot of like Isaiah Bond types out of Texas that are 5'11" that have worked off the outside. Where is he out at the next level? Probably slot. How is he going to win on the outside? Does he have enough speed? I don't think he does. And it's a really weak crew. It is. Yeah. And I think that does help you to make this kind of trade, Dan, for especially a team that thinks of themselves as a contender, because we're not talking about low first round and mid first round. We're talking in the 20s with a team that thinks they are a contender, and a DK addition in there can help to take them up over the top. And so I think that this is the time where you have to make this question and really think about it, because this is your one opportunity to make this kind of deal in this situation. You sign him to the extension after this point. There's no more of that ever on the table. That's out the door on it. You're riding with them into the future. And so I am open to doing this. I also think, in addition to the points that you made, and I think you'll agree with me on this, being the fact that we haven't seen as much refinement from him over his career here and advancement in those skills, when he ages, there's an argument to be made that maybe his game is not going to age particularly great with that. And that's got me concerned and worried here. So you throw it all into a bundle. I'm not necessarily out and out saying just toss it away. I love DK. I do. If they want to sign him to extension, I will celebrate it and applaud it. I can go either way on this one, but I certainly, in the emblem of looking at this, Dan, of saying, are we contending or not? In my outlook of an 05, I don't think we're ready to go. It informs these other decisions. That would probably, if you're asking me as a GM, I'm probably more pushed to look and make that move with what I expect to be with the deal on the table. Just because that's where I stand on it,
I want to get into the other side of the football, and I want to get to some of the comments and questions. We've got over 300 waiting, chomping at the bit. Let me do this first real quick. Head on over to BetUS, you guys. Check out the early money lines for this weekend's games, as well as all the prop bets. You can get in on live betting all throughout the weekend as well. And if you sign up for a new account today, they'll give you a 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit, 125% on your second and third deposits, up to $2,000 if you use the promo code YouTube150. Let's flip over to the other side of the ball, and then we'll get to some of these comments, questions, and takes from your viewers and mine. I've been maintaining for weeks now that as I said at the top of the show, I think this defense has arrived. I think they're legitimate. I think it's sustainable, and it's something you can use as a foundation to build around. And for the most part, it's done with younger players. So I think you don't have to squint too hard to see this defense being good moving forward. But there's some decisions to be made, and there's some potential money to be freed up. You could bring back the entire unit if you want to next year, and maybe Mike Macdonald would want to. But how do you feel about the group as a whole, how they finished the season? And then, some of the decisions that Draymond Jones is an obvious one that comes up, right? His contract is easily manipulated. That's an easy way to clear up some cap space if you wanted to release him or restructure him. Mike Macdonald has raved about his contributions on the team, even though he's not a guy that fills up the stat sheet. We saw Leonard Williams really maybe have his best year of his career this season. Roy Robertson-Harris came over in a midseason trade. Again, Macdonald raving about his contributions, another guy that does the dirty work. No guaranteed money left on his deal. You can easily extend him or restructure that if you want to. Jaron Reed really finished the season strong, had another great season as a veteran, but he's on an expiring contract. Where are you with this group as a whole? And moving forward, how motivated are you to try to keep it intact?
I think they're on the right path. I don't know if I'm as strongly as believing that it's been cemented that for instance, we get back to next year, which is with a viewpoint on this, especially that they're that ready to lock it in. When I look at the defense this year and the performances that they had that were really good, it was mainly against lesser offenses. When they had bad offenses, they had backup quarterbacks. You have a rookie starting his first game in Lumen Field. Yeah, they took those teams apart, which is good to see. That's no small thing, Dan. We've had backup quarterbacks slay us here for years with, of course, Carroll in here, and that used to be a problem, right? So that is something that's cleaned up and is a good thing. But when you did have to play legitimate offenses this year, even in the recent games here at the back of the schedule, because somebody said, well, you cleaned it up by the back end. Yeah, Packers kind of took it to you, and they took their foot off the gas in the second half of that game. Vikings kind of had a pretty good way with you in your house. I can't quite get that point to it where, again, I'm looking at it through that lens of not merely are you good, are you bad, are you above average, are you a contender? And when you went up against the contending teams offensively, the Buffalo Bills, Daniel Jones cutting you apart in your house, I go, yeah, there's growing pains there, sure. But when we're talking about this team being one that next year, we don't have a lot of offensive certainty on that being an offense that's ready to really click in and go. They're inconsistent. So this is going to have to be a defense that carries a team into contention then, Dan, if that is the way we're going to roll with this. I don't know that I quite see a team ready to contend. I think that they're better to just kind of run most of this back. Unlike the offense, where I think there's actually some stuff to be done, this is more of, to me, of you can do more of just kind of mostly run it back. You got to let go of Draymond to clear out the cap space. Unfortunately, it's the way it goes. Roy Robertson Harris will be moved on, I believe, as well, because that's $6.6 million that you save by getting off of that contract. So there's going to be some movement here, but it'll probably all boil down to you're going to need to get a nose tackle in here. You're going to need to get probably another edge, and we'll see what happens. Uchenna's kind of on the line. We'll see with that one, but there is some money to be saved with Uchenna too. If you move Uchenna, you need an edge, and then we'll see what happens with Reek. Woolen, in my opinion on this, I'd be none too surprised if the team were to look to move him this offseason. I'm not exactly sure that he's a fit for what McDonald wants from his cornerbacks, but everything else other than that's in good shape. It just needs to kind of continue to develop and motor along a bit.
Yeah, that the Reek one is such a mystery. It's such a tough one. I think back to the beginning of the season when I heard Leslie Frazier was on the Move the Sticks podcast with
I heard that one,
Jeremiah, and talked about how they thought so highly of him. They thought he was a guy that could travel with number one receivers, and
got you hyped, didn't it? It got me hyped too, didn't it? And you're like, oh, here we go, Leslie, because an old guy like that talking about it like that, he's getting excited by it. You're like, and those old guys, they've seen it all. They're not excited by anything at that point. So.
He's kind of this analogy just occurred to me. He's kind of the DK Metcalf of the defense. Like, he just leaves you wanting more, right? Like, his coverage grades look good, but there's one or two times every week it seems like there's a play that he didn't make that would have been impactful if he had made it. I do think we saw more of the effort and the want to in the run game this year that he was criticized so heavily for last year. Maybe it was the shoulder last year after all, but I thought he was more willing to stick his nose in there and get a little bit more physical. And yet, for all of his length, he doesn't jam guys and use his hands at the line of scrimmage the way we'd like to see him. He just, after that rookie year where he took the ball away, now he's not. I don't know, but he's another guy that if you really think that you can't stand pat, that if the organization looks at themselves and is honest with themselves and thinks, okay, we need to do some fairly dramatic things to this roster to get him over the edge. He's one of those few assets on the roster that, as hard as it is for teams to come by tall, long, potential lockdown corners, and a guy that's still, I think, an ascending player and a guy that has some development left, how valuable might he be if they were to make him available?
I think third round is the highest you're going to get for him. But with that said, I think you're starting to understand a little bit, but you're seeing where I'm coming from on this a bit with this offseason potential approach is that you have some assets here that you could be offloading and taking that 2 steps back, where it's not just purely letting somebody go for nothing. You take the collection of, let's say, 2 or 3 potential players, even 4 players that are on that board of maybe finding some assets you can offload. That's a bit in that 2 steps back thing I talk about. And I think that that's where you can recoup some of that value. You can get your cap space into a good stage. You can set the stage to then have 26 to 27 to have all this endless kind of cap space to really roll. I look at what the Cardinals did, for instance, this last year, Dan, where they got to the trade deadline. They could have been aggressive. They were right up there around the division. They had money. They could have gone out hard. But they went, no, we're not ready yet. We're not ready yet. Let's stay in the process of our plan. Let's get this to this offseason. They got $100 million to spend now. They're in the catbird seat as far as this division moving into the future in a lot of ways. And so this is kind of what I'm advocating for a little bit. But I see it the same way. I like your reference on the comparison between a DK and a Tariq. I think it's kind of similar. Has he advanced beyond the first year? It kind of seems like the rookie year was his best season. The tackling has maybe come a little bit further along, but I don't know that he's advanced tremendously in other aspects of things. And the tackling came a little forward, but not tremendously forward. And again, like DK with it a little bit, value might be a little bit at its highest potentially to move him to a team, especially if you're not going to consider that you want to sign him to a contract extension in the long term. And this is what, to me, smart organizations would do if this is their evaluation and outlook of the situation.
Yeah. If we go trading key guys like that, I wonder, given the fact that we continue to hear, and I haven't dove as deep as I'd like to, or will eventually into this class either, but just keep hearing about how shallow it is, that, maybe you're looking to move guys for players in return instead of just draft picks, right? Like try to move an asset where maybe you have a strength or a surplus for something that can help. right?
The draft's not as bad as people are saying with this. What happens with this and studying drafts in recent years and what occurs, Dan, is people get very high-end centric on NFL drafts. So if there's not the cacophony of blue chip prospects that dive into 20s in the first round, it's an underwhelming. If they're not those sensational wide receivers, if there's not those quarterback prospects, you're going to have the 2 quarterbacks go in the top 5. In last year's draft, both of those guys would have gone after the top probably 6 guys on the board.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what makes people colors the view of this a little bit. But the thing to consider with this is the NIL situation, and that's pushed these prospects out to go to school more longer than they would have in years past. So the prospects you're getting out are more further advanced. And it's really it's different positions that have the strength in this draft than the traditional ones that people tend to, love to see and want to see a lot of depth up that get them really excited. So I think that there is still some good players in this draft that could work for what we want, especially like nose tackle, for instance. There's more nose tackles in this draft than you've had the last couple of drafts as far as quality goes.
Yeah, it's one of the strengths of the draft for sure.
Yeah, one of the strengths. So it's just about, it's different. It's an average draft, but I don't know if I'd go as far as to say I feel like this week thing. Sometimes people say this, and then we'll get through the post-draft process, and then it turns into an average class once we get through everybody looking at the prospects fully.
Right. Let's get into some of these comments and questions. Here's a guy we haven't talked about, but since we're talking about young assets, potentially trading, moving guys, and fit when it comes to what Mike McDonald wants to do and how he wants to play on defense and offense. Aaron Alexander, trade K9 for a ham Sammy and a foot massage or some picks, I guess. Where do you stand on K9, his running style, and what we've seen from Zach Charbonnet and Kenny McIntosh in his absence?
Yeah, K9, I think, is a really ultra talented running back. I think there's a little bit of stuff that happens with K9 that's happened with Gino Smith, and that when you cumulatively over many seasons have yourself getting hit in the backfield almost as soon as you get the handoff / there's no hole there for you to run through. You start to bounce. Now, when there is a hole there, now when you're a quarterback that does have the clean pocket and, I'm seeing ghosts. I'm bouncing it out when I should have. Well, if you give them more of the consistent holes that they can run through, that's maybe not going to happen quite as much. I do think that this was sort of like a Madden score, Dan. You'd have K9 on a 0 to 10 scale. You'd have him as sort of a elusiveness, 9 speed, 9 moves, 9 vision, 3. That's a bit how I feel with him on it. Even with that issue there on him, and he's capable out of the backfield. The problem on trade value is this: there is no trade value.
Right. If
he had gone out and had a 1,400 yard season, you could have talked a team up that would have looked at the Josh Jacobs situation or the Saquon Barkley situation and said, okay, we'll trade for him and we will sign to that extension. And this is actually a newfangled approach by NFL teams to take with the running back position versus you don't pay him. But he'd had the worst year of his pro career. He once again has injuries has come up every single season. So there is no trade value. What you do in this situation, in my opinion, is that Charbonnet becomes your lead back. You condense down the touches to K9. So it's a 10 to 13 touch guy a game is what he becomes to me. Not a bell cow guy, not a 20 touch guy, but you factor in the fact in his final season that you're going to kind of protect him a little bit like that. And then you just play out the final year and you let it sort of stand at that point. And if he has a great halfway into the year, by the way, next year, trade deadline, if there's a team that's looking for a running back at the trade deadline at that point, then you can move him at that point when there's actually some value.
That's been my vision too. And especially since we got to see Charbonnet in some extended looks this year, we got to see what he's potential of is I look at what Ben Johnson does with that Detroit Lions roster. And I want to see Charbonnet be the David Johnson or the David Montgomery. And I want to see Ken Walker more in a Jahmyr Gibbs role. Like they just seemed dead set on making him the lead back, even when he came back from injury earlier this year. And to a fault, I think, just because of where they are and what they're capable of doing. I want to see this Sunday. I'd love to see Ken McIntosh get 10 touches. I think it's interesting how different Charbonnet and McIntosh are stylistically. Charbonnet is very patient. He likes to wait, see the hole develop, and then he's decisive about it. Whereas McIntosh Gino Smith's got to get that ball into his gut as quickly as possible because he's moving, he's going, he's 100 miles an hour from the snap, and he's just going to figure it out and find a crease on the way. I think that fits where they are right now and what they need right now. And it's obviously a moot point right now with Walker being hurt, but just yet another, there's some fascinating decisions to make on this roster this offseason for sure.
if they wanted, to your point, if they wanted to move, if they could find a partner out there for K9 and offset to go with those other two backs, and then you draft another guy in the 4th, 5th round, I'd have no issues taking that approach with it. I just don't want to sell them sort of for turkey sandwich essentially.
And sure we just talked about the draft a little bit. It is pretty widely recognized that running back is one of the strengths of this draft. It's a very, very deep class.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got. Tobias Larson, DK, has hit his top level. We won't see him any better, even though he has the talent. That's just what we got to expect. Maybe some team thinks with their offense they can do better with him for a trade. And that's the point you were making. Is a team. I know this is easy. This is low hanging fruit. But if the Kansas City Chiefs could fit him onto their payroll, like with the style of receivers that they have, like adding a bigger, more physical guy to that mix would probably be something that they might see a lot of appeal in, just as one example.
That's been the team I've gone to a little bit, and people will go, well, no Tyreek Hill. And I go, well, it's kind of worked out for them, but it's also kind of not done the Tyreek Hill. Because when you look at the revolving door of wide receivers and you look at the offense of the Kansas City Chiefs that's been stilted this year, you could trace, I think, a little bit of it back to that where it's 2nd round pick for Sky Moore, 2nd round pick given up for Kadarius Toney, I believe. The James Worthy kid's got baby alligator arms and only a couple of 100-yard receivers and kind of a one-trick pony in what he can do. They're running out there Juju Smith-Schuster and DeAndre Hopkins right now in important ball games at the end of the season. So is that a team that looks at it from a course correction standpoint and says, maybe we'll go back on this. We would give Mahomes this guy that would be a perfect pairing between the two of them and throw those guys together. Or a team even out in the AFC that also looks at it in a similar situation. Baltimore Ravens team. What if you could bring a DK in and then have that with Lamar as a counterbalance, forcing teams into cover 2 shells? What do you want to do? You want to go cover 2 shell? You want to keep your guy down the box as a spy on Lamar? How do you want to roll it? So I think you could find a couple teams, and I do think a 1st round pick would go. I know you mentioned that maybe after Diggs there wouldn't, or after Brown there wouldn't be, but there has been in recent years a good amount of receivers that go for standard issue cost of a 1st round pick, be it a Tyreek Hill, be it Devontae Adams, be it a couple of these guys we just mentioned here a second ago. So there is a baseline of this, of it being this cost for a player about DK's age. He's not 30 years old. He's only 27 right now. So I think it's a feasible kind of deal that could be presented.
Yeah, and you talk about trade value, like, there was a lot of talk last year that maybe they were even shopping him or open to a trade if someone had approached them, but it was, what, we have 6, 7 receivers go in the 1st round last year. Like it was like the 3rd or 4th year in a row of just a stacked wide receiver class. And as you mentioned, with Tet McMillan really being the only guy right now that's a consensus 1st rounder, you see Luther Burden out of Missouri in some mocks as well, but he's fallen way down. He's had some injuries.
He's a slot only guy.
Yeah, there are
Emeka Abuka, slot only guy.
Yeah, it's lacking Metcalf type receivers that maybe
X receivers are not. There's not many in this draft. You mentioned Ted. I think there's guys maybe in 3rd and 4th round. Sorry to interrupt you, but that there's just not those X guys on the outside that can handle press coverage, get off the press. It's a lot of Z's or slots. That I'm seeing so far on the tape with these guys.
So if you're going to trade him, this might be the perfect opportunity this year. Opportunity is it all fits together, right? The comment we have on the screen right now from Slobey One, thinking the Cowboys couldn't use a K9 right now is crazy. Well, yeah, they certainly would love a young, impactful running back, but you know what? They're sitting right now drafting 13th. They might have a shot at Ashton Genty. And but even if they miss out on him, there's a loaded running back class behind it. You're gonna trade for a guy that's in the 4th? Will he be in his 4th? Is K9's 3rd year? 3rd year.
He's going to his 4th year.
It'd be in the last year of his rookie deal, right? His 2nd round pick, so no 5th year option. So you're getting him on an expiring contract in the 4th year of a 2nd round deal versus drafting a guy and getting a much lower cap hit in year 1. I think that's pretty easy value.
Yeah,
to me.
I don't think, and you mentioned Genty. Of course, the Cowboys have a track record of being one of those few teams out there that will take a running back in the 1st round. So, with having done with Ezekiel in recent years. So I thought Genty seems like the straightforward. That just seems like a Cowboy pick to me too on that end. This is where I come back around to probably if you're going to get value for Walker will not be this offseason, but would be around a trade deadline deal where if you're not contending, then you could move him to a team that's a contender that needs a running back and you get something around that 3rd round at that time.
Gen X US Marine, I'm not pro Gino. I never wanted to re-sign the dude. Start Howell Sunday to see what you got. So I've heard a lot of this type of sentiment. And also Gino's in line to hit a couple escalators on Sunday that would add to his cap hit next year. One of them is yards. I think he's 189 yards away from hitting that one. The Seahawks aren't this type of organization, don't typically make moves like this. They're not going to think about sitting him Sunday and starting Howell or Jaron Hall.
They're not, but they should. So this isn't about, I'm not really, caring about like, well, you got to do right by the player and let him get his incentives on that for the sake of, you're getting your incentives because you're helping us win. We're out of the playoffs. You haven't been playing necessarily a particularly good brand of football, Gino, in recent weeks. And oh, by the way, you're injured. That's also kind of a bit of a deal. You're diminished in your skill set right now. So I wouldn't do it myself. You mentioned, because it's $3-4 million we're talking about off the cap. Yeah. You want to roll this route with it. So, $4 million decision on my point for a team that I'm looking to start to make that strong decision to turn this thing over. That doesn't mean invest in the old, in my opinion. That means pivot to the new. Yeah. And so I'd be very much in favor of just going with Hal. This game doesn't matter. Just roll with him. You learn a little bit more about what you got with him. First time he ran out there, the guy looked like a rookie in his first start. So let's see if he looks like that again, because he is on a 1-year $1 million deal as Hal. If he can be even just a functional freaking backup for us, that's good value at that cost for whoever we pair him with.
And I guess they do have an out because Gino's not 100%. He's not playing healthy. And I think we saw that in Chicago. I think you could see there were a couple throws where, he's just not able to set his base and let rip the way he wants to.
He didn't want to scramble for 2 yards in the game. It's one of the places that drove me most. And somebody tried to go to this. Somebody showed me a screenshot of there was a spy in the play. The spy was late. All he had to do was get 2 yards and fall forward. You're trying to keep yourself in the playoff hunt. The season's on the line, and he's like, tries to throw a haphazard pass to JSN there. I mean, that alone from a coaching staff perspective, I show him that film and go, Gino, we're going with Sam. Sam's can go get us 2 yards in this game. I appreciate your incentives and all that other stuff, but like, we're here partly by the way that you played down the stretch and some of your poor decision making. Is there maybe an excuse for it with the line to a degree? Yeah, but have you thrown those picks? Have you had some of these games where the defense has played well and you've kind of just punted away with those interceptions and turnovers? Yeah, there has.
Yeah. I want to get to some of the super chats and the starred comments. Martin Lawrence, thank you. If you'd said we'd replace the coaching staff, improve the defense, still had a winning regular season record, I'd have been okay for that this season. There's a lot of this sentiment out there. I think, in fact, I would say, a lot of the attention sometimes goes to the negativity and the cynicism. But I think most fans that I engage with are satisfied in the first year of a new head coach that they have an opportunity to win 10 games and just didn't quite go their way. So I think a lot of that's out there. But then you have the other side of it. Thomas Cox says he doesn't think Seattle's going to be good till 2026 or longer.
Well, that's where, to Thomas's point, that's why I lead it up at the top, because I think what happens when we talk about these negative things is that we get lost in the forest despite the trees on this. It is the two separate things. And it is that this is a successful year. Mike McDonald is the right coach for us to get us to the mountaintop, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're competing in 2025. And that's the leap that people want to make, is that good year this year, then we get to that where. Well, no. And again, I rail on this a bit, and maybe too much so, Dan, because of the fact this has been a mistake the organization has made in prior years many times over. Yeah. And I don't want to see them make the same mistakes. Organizations get things wrong, get things right. Do you correct what you get wrong over and over again? Or is it the Einstein thing where you continue to do the same thing, the definition of insanity that fails time and time again? And that's why I'm so worried about this. And I think it's got to be a bit at the forefront of what the Hawks are thinking about organizationally heading into this offseason.
Yeah. And another thing I'm going to be keeping an eye on is just how John Schneider goes about his business this offseason. I'm not so sure that he's not on the hot seat entering next year, and that another mediocre season might put him in trouble, given what ownership expressed to him when they made the change with Pete Carroll.
Yeah, I agree. I think especially
right. Like people come at me, sorry to cut you off there, but people come at me all the time and they say he's not going to fix the offensive line. He never has. He never will. He said that one thing that one time. And that means no, John Schneider wants to keep this job. He wants to stay in Seattle for his entire career. I can assure you of that. He hears the noise, right? He has people on his staff and in his front office that scour the internet and they read social media and they watch what we do. And I know that for a fact. He knows what the fan base is thinking of him, and he knows what the perception is of what the weaknesses are on this team. He has to know if he doesn't fix that perennial issue and turn it into a strength and get this team to contention status, at some point his job's on the line.
I have to think it will be, if just but for this offensive line situation and his approach to it, if he doesn't deal with it. This offensive line sunk your offense this year. You had a top 5 offense with the talent that you had in the backfield and the receiving core, but because you couldn't put a functional line, I'm not talking about dominant, not talking about good, I'm talking a functional offensive line together, you sunk your whole offense. And this is not the first year that you've walked into this. And it's been a blind spot for him for years, and we can have a huge long conversation as to why this has become this way with John. I think it's been an evolution, and I think that he's just not really reacted well to the fact that there's not as many quality offensive linemen coming out. He's kind of just gotten frustrated by it and thrown his hands up in that transition to spread offenses that has happened in college football over the last 10 years, where it's everywhere now. And that these guys come out, they're not refined. You remember Cable used to bitch and moan about it too, when he was here about that. And so I think that he just hasn't adjusted well to this, but it's to the point now where we're beyond the pale, man. You know, Robert Gallery was the last free agent contract you signed for a quality offensive lineman in free agency. That was 2010, bro. That's 15 years ago. And I've said with this, people go, well, you know, he's drafting. Go, there's 3 different ways. There's 3 different utilization points to improve your offensive line or any positional group on your team. Draft is just one of those ways. Free agency and trade. And people go, and I had EJ Snyder on a Bootleg Football on my channel a couple days ago and asked him this question, and he confirmed a little bit of this to his direct conversations with people that are front office people that he talks to. And that they said, you know, people go, you can't trade for a lineman because they don't happen very often. And I said, I think what happens is that there are trades that you can go do for a lineman, but the general manager doesn't want to give up the goods. I just want to give the 2nd round pick. I don't want to do the 2 and the 3. I just want the 2. And the most successful trade that we've had for an offensive lineman here in 15 years is Dwayne Brown. Dwayne Brown, you traded a 2nd round pick for in Jeremy Lane. The Texans got Jeremy Lane, and I think that they played some shenanigans on that deal. They got some blowback for how cheap they gave up Dwayne Brown at that point, and they said they failed the physical of Jeremy Lane, and they said, okay, no, you got to give us the 3rd round pick back. Did John go, no, trade's over with, trade's done, take back Dwayne, trade's done, I'm not doing that? Or did he give up the 2nd or 3rd round pick? Was it tremendously successful for you as a move? Why not go down that lane once again? So I think that there's a move to be made here. I think you can go in free agency and do this, but it takes a willfulness to get it done. And that's the part that remains to be seen when it comes with Schneider, if he's willing to do that or not.
And I've been saying for a while, I've been trying to tell anyone that will listen that you don't necessarily have to go try to find elite offensive linemen. And to the point that you just made, like, you know, it's not Trey Smith or bust. Right. You don't have to go out and hand someone $100 million contract. You look at how the Packers built their offensive line, one that manhandled us a couple of weeks ago at Lumen Field. It's a bunch of day 2 and day 3 draft picks that are young and that have just started to come together. I was watching the Giants game yesterday. Drew Lock's best game of his career, right? We're very familiar here with Drew Lock. He throws for 4 touchdowns, runs for another one, 400 yards. He was really efficient, looked really comfortable. He had time to operate behind an offensive line that's kind of been pieced together from a bunch of different sources over the last couple of years too. They have a 1st round pick in Evan Neal, but some people have considered him almost a borderline bust. They go out in free agency. They sign John Runyon and Jermaine Illuminor, not elite, not top end of the market, like good, solid linemen that they paid significant money to, but not Robert Hunt money. They draft John Michael Schmitz in the 2nd round a couple of years ago. So they do that. And then they fill holes with guys like Greg Van Roten, who the Seahawks had in for a visit last offseason, chose Laken Tomlinson over him. And then Van Roten, until recently, was starting for the Giants and playing pretty well. And Locke had all day to throw. And I don't know. I know there are some Seahawk fans that would still argue with us today that they think Drew Lock's better than Geno Smith, but the evidence, the historical evidence doesn't suggest that. But he was able to operate because that offensive line gave him plenty of time. And it's one that was put together in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. And the Drew Lock, you're right about that opinion that's existed out there. And it's a silly one because Drew Lock's had some other opportunities to play beyond just this one game where he's looked way and over his head playing. He's looked similar to how Sam Howell looked a little bit when he's gone out there. Yeah. And even when he played for your Seahawks.
You know that if Geno's released next week, you know it's coming, right?
Oh, I'm sure it is, but it's going to be, I'm going to push back and it's going to be as silly as ever because we started them 2 games last year and our offensive play calling in that game was completely protectionism where we were just throw the ball out here, throw it. They were trying to make sure they didn't have him pushing the ball down the field because they didn't trust him not to throw an interception. And that was telling on those 2 games that he started in the Niners and the Eagles game. I think the Eagles game, he averaged 4.5 yards an attempt in that game. And that's with the JSN throw at the end over the top.
Yeah,
So
you just had the one great drive. Yeah.
Yeah, it ain't there with Drew Lock. It's one game that he had at the end of the year with the Indianapolis Colts team that's probably wasn't necessarily all checked in here down the stretch for a team that doesn't have anything they're playing for. Doesn't also have the greatest of pass rush necessarily to go after you there. So I it's a one-off there with Lock. It's not going to continue with him, I'd say, on that side of it. But it's interesting performance that he pulled off. Good for him. But you're right about the line. I will say this with like the Packers on this. This is development too. And if you're going to be that guy, well, just stay to the second, third round. And if we ran kind of the Packer and the model, and I love their model, man, you're right. And they don't spend money, but they develop better than we develop. We're not developing linemen. Bradford's not developing. Oluwatimi's not developing. Haynes didn't take any steps forward this year. Sa'atoa, for whatever he gave you as a run blocker, is single digits as a pass protector with PFF scores, and that's representatory of all the pressures and sacks he's given up. I'd love to go find another Howard Mudd guy that we used to have back in the day. Great, or maybe our best offensive line coach in our history, or to have a Scarmecchia with New England, or what they're out there with Green Bay, or what they got with the Eagles. I don't think we got that, and so I think this is important.
Because, Grubb and Huff have been tied at the hip. Are you saying you think it's possible that they keep Grubb, make a change with Scott Huff?
I'm saying if you keep Grubb and you're rolling then with Huff, what you would then do if you're keeping with Gruff. Just to your point on just draft development side, the onus now becomes upon getting something that's more certain in what's out there and that they're already ready to run. And so this is, I'm not against your approach on this, by the way. If all things, I'd like to just roll with that draft thing. But this is what I think John's kind of tried to do when he's gone to the free agency, because he's, as I say, not made a trade, right? So when he has gone to free agency, it's to squeeze out that one final year of a guy in his 30s. And I'm going to give him a 1-year deal and kind of just, come on, give us that one last, just go. No, I think you got to go get actually the quality and certainty now at this point. And it's not about dominance, not necessarily about the Trey Smith. You said a second ago, this is about getting this to a middle of the road state. If you want to just bring back Gino DK and then hammer the line, get it to a middle of the road state, that can be an offense that can go top 5, I think. But you've got to really then take the certain steps to get it there. And it's not just go, well, just draft in the 3rd round and we'll take another guy in the 5th and 6th round. And then we'll sign some old ass free agent who's almost done. That ain't going to get the job done.
Kevin Mullen, a little revisionist history here. 2024 draft number 16. Do you go Troy Fautanu or Byron Murphy still? Well, Fautanu missed the entire season, I think, with that knee injury that had him off the Seahawks draft board. So that wasn't going to happen. But this gives me an opportunity to ask you about the 1st-round rookie for the Seahawks. Another guy, didn't fill up the stat sheet, hasn't had a sack yet, should have had one a couple of weeks ago, got the face mask against the Vikings that nullified that. What, the consensus seems to be he's playing a little bit out of position. Maybe that's holding him back from being the player that fans want to see him being, but how would you assess his rookie year?
Team's got a frustrating history in Seattle over the last about 7 or 8 years of finding players and putting them out of a position that's counterintuitive to what they can do best. And they do it by necessity sometimes. Other times they just do it by happenstance. This is taking Jimmy Graham, a slot wide receiver, basically, and trying to turn him into an inline tight end. This is a guy taking Jamal Adams, who's a down around the box kind of guy, more blitz heavy. And absent the first year where you blitzed him at a 13% rate, you tried to turn him into a cover 2 shell safety that was going to do free safety type stuff at times and how you had him cover. This team loves to do this type of stuff for whatever reason, and it doesn't make always a lot of sense to me on this one. And this is just another one where I'm scratching my head a little bit on it as to, in retrospect of it, of the plan is you're going to draft him and play him nose tackle his whole rookie year.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, in retrospect on this one, you just should have traded back, because as much a high as you were on Murphy, this problem ain't going away.
Yeah.
This problem ain't going away. Because Leonard
aren't seeing anything out of Cam Young or Mike Morris. Nope,
Cam Young can't stay active, and like I said, and Morris is going to be more of kind of edge 3 tech if he's going to roll that way. And you went with Hankins, and they're one of those aging veterans, last leg. Can we squeeze out that final year? No, you can't. You got to go get quality with it. But this is confounding to me, not for the this year problem of it. It's confounding for the fact that it's not going away problem side of it. Because Leonard Williams had probably the 2nd best year for you as a Seahawk in the defensive tackle in your history. Tez's defensive player of the year season is probably only one that's better. And that means that when you go into next year and you only have 1 3 tech, unless this team's going to turn into a wide 9 with, and how they want to roll it into the future, you're stuck here with Murphy now into the foreseeable future here. his snaps of that 3-tech are going to be highly limited. He's going to be your nose tackle going forward. That's not a real good way to use a player on his first contract who you're hoping to maximize, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Where you stand on it?
I think he's a really, really good player. And I think they just need to find, as you said, they just need to find the right spot for him and bring in someone that can free him up. That's what we saw with Leonard Williams. He had to play out of position. Draymond Jones, they had to play inside last year after they signed him in free agency before moving him out to the edge.
Well, that's another guy that he's an inside guy. So the thing with Denver is he played some snaps on the edge, but predominantly what he did, where he gets his pressures, where he gets his sacks. If you go watch his highlight tape with Denver, it's from within the 3-tech role on that team.
Yeah.
So this is another representation of a guy that you spent $17 million to move him out of position of what you originally, the reason that you paid him the $17 million was because of what he did with you 3-tech, and now you're moving him to the edge. That's why I say where there's this.
Well, he wasn't good as a 3-tech for us.
Well, he wasn't, but it's like, what are we doing though, man? Like, this is not the way to build a good team, is you pay for this for the guy doing this, and then you're going to move him over, having him do this, which is also diminished from what he was doing. It's kind of asinine to me at one point or another. It really toes that line of being kind of dumb in their approach on this. And people go, well, he wasn't a fit for, McDonald's scheme. Well, it still doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it a smart decision on John Schneider's part for what was the highest paid free agent in Seattle Seahawks history.
Right. Is that a no-brainer? They move on from him, you think, despite McDonald saying nice things about him?
The 22 tape is brutal with him at times on an effort standpoint. Sometimes it's there. Sometimes it's not. And he's not comfortable operating off the edge. He's not an edge guy. Now, people go to pressure numbers. Some of that is by just the nature, in my opinion, of how many swings he's gotten at it a bit. That those pressure numbers, when you take them rather than percentage basis, but take them on total.
Yeah.
If you got a guy that's got more swings, more bites at the apple, then they may make him look better than he actually is. But his PFF scores match up to what I see from him on tape. There is some good at times, but it ain't consistently there over the game, and certainly not worthwhile for the price that you're paying.
Sloby Wan says, thanks for the super chat. Can we complain about the interception? I'm still not over it. Sad ass way to lose the West. This does give me an opportunity to ask you about the division, because I do think there's an opportunity here, right? And the Seahawks have to see that as well. We saw the 49ers completely fall apart this season. And while you can project that maybe all the guys that got hurt this year will get healthy next year, they still had a flawed roster to begin with. And now they're going to have to pay their quarterback a ton of money, which, obviously in the first year of a new deal, it's not that impactful. But Trent Williams isn't getting any younger. There's issues there. The Rams, who knows how much longer Stafford's going to play. There was trade talk potentially of Cooper Kupp at the deadline. He's a diminishing player. Do they move on from him this offseason? They didn't get the bang for the buck that they expected in free agency with those guards because their offensive line was banged up all year. They've got a fun young defense, and maybe that's the foundation for them moving forward. But I don't know that any of us look at this Rams team and think they're that much better than us right now. They just have a better quarterback. And then there's the Cardinals, who from the moment he signed his big extension, I have always said, I don't see anything special in Kyler Murray. I don't think he's that guy. They just did the rest of the division a favor by handing him that money. We hear every year about how he's more committed. He's spending more time in the film room. He's the first one in the facility. I still don't see any more of a special player now than I did before, and that play is indicative of that, where he throws the ball into the guy's ear hole. They shouldn't have even been throwing the football there, but that's a whole nother story. The shine is definitely worn off Drew Petzig's shooting star. But your thoughts on the division as a whole after the season and kind of where it's headed and where the Seahawks can fit into that?
Definitely don't think there's any juggernauts that are going to emerge next year. I think it's going to still be a hyper competitive division, in that there's not also any bottom feeders. So you don't have that feast factor that you can usually take advantage of if you want to go that route. So it's going to still be a battle every week. Cardinals with $100 million to spend. I think I've been very impressed with where they're running. I think Gannon, I was not a big guy on him, but when I watch, and I've watched every single one of their games this year, they play hard every single week. They don't beat themselves. They have an interesting scheme on both sides of the ball. And quite frankly, I think they found the way that could potentially work with Kyler Murray in the long term, being that you limit down him from being a guy that, you pay that money, you want to turn him into a high volume passer. Cliff Kingsbury, air raid, what they had there with him. Instead, what they've done, what I think is the smarter way to go with Kyler, is getting him more into that 30 attempts role, and then having the run game as a counterbalance, working him under center off of the roll and the play action. I think if you get them some more talent, because what stood out to me this year is that Marvin Harrison's been a little bit slow to come along. He's been fine. But then in Wilson and Dortch, you don't have the guys that can make a role there to be difference makers on that side. Those guys are just guys at their best. They need some help over there. They got $100 million to spend. They're going to spend some money. They're going to get that defense with some more playmakers on its side of it. They're going to be difficult in the future, in my opinion. Niners are hard to say. They're coming to the end of the road, but there's two major players that could announce their retirement this offseason. It wouldn't shock me if Christian McCaffrey's like, I'm probably done. And Trent Williams is getting older than father time. And you got to figure he's probably going, I don't know if next year maybe we're going to be good. Maybe he calls it as well. That would affect my outlook of that team heavily. I still think they're going to be a tough team, though. They're going to have a lot of talent. It's not going to be an easy walkthrough on it, but it is a wide open division. And with the Rams, you're right about them, though. They still have Stafford. They have an offensive line where you're right, where Jonah Jackson didn't work as maybe as one of the signings, but still they've got Dotson. They've got their other offensive lineman, Logan Bruss, the center that they drafted this last year, has fit in really well for them and taken off. So even though they drafted
back.
Yeah, he'll be back. And so you failed on Jonah for center, but this guy did work. And now Jonah gives you some depth there. Yeah. And then you have some protection for Stafford now. You're right about Cooper Kupp. He looks like he's been diminished or just something's not right with him. But then that young defense has really come together fast for them and is probably only going to continue to get better in the foreseeable future here. So that one really hinges on Stafford retiring or not. If he doesn't, then to me, they would be the lead dog going into next year that I would put as the number one team to take the division.
Even if Stafford comes back, I gotta think that this offseason that Sean McVay's he wants to find maybe a successor. We heard last year they were one of the teams in on Sam Howell at the trade deadline. Yeah. Maybe he's out there looking for that next young guy to hand it off to. That'll be interesting to see as well. Thank you, Dogzilla Monster, for the super chat.
I think Dogzilla. Everybody improves. What was he saying? Everybody improves in offensive line.
Everybody improves with a good offensive line. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
We should put that on shirts. Print that.
Rising tide raises all boats, man. That offensive line.
Shout out to Bryce Coots of the Hawks on Rundown podcast, sporting the hat right here.
Thank you, Bryce.
He says, love listening to you both debate these topics. As I was reading it in the comments and I saw the first line, I thought it was, before I saw it was Bryce, I thought it was someone saying Brandon and Dan love listening to themselves talk.
Well, that's probably true too.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not going. Joined a bit late, but who would be your top 3 OC replacements if Grubb is let go? Do you have some guys in mind?
I want to go for certainty. I don't want to take any more flyers at this point. So let's get a guy that's called plays in this league. I guess probably, and maybe no order exactly, but Brian Daboll, McDaniel with Miami if he's let go, Stefanski if he were to be let go, Steichen with Colts if he were to be let go. There's not a ton of candidates out there right now as it stands, but that would be kind of that'd be the archetype I would look to, is give me a guy that's had offensive success as a coordinator in this league, knows what he wants to call, has his connections in the league to build proper staff around beneath that on, offensive line coaches, of course, that's the big factor there. So I would go something around that direction of things.
It's interesting too, because it would make a whole lot of sense if they are going to move off a guy like Ryan Grubb, that's where you're going to pivot to. Right. You're going to do, if you're not going to, if you're going to take a shot on someone who's never called plays before, if you're going to go back to the Mike Kafka well or whatever, that, might as well just keep Grubb and see if he can develop. This is an idea that Corbin Smith threw out there about a month ago. And the more I think about it and talk to other people about it, it does make some sense because he did coordinate the 3 best offensive years this team's had in the last 10 years.
Oh, Lord.
What are your thoughts on Brian Schottenheimer?
I'm a no on Brian Schottenheimer. Part of why he was hired here and all that, of course, was that any OCs coming in were going to be yes men, and I don't like that part that any OC would accept that, quite frankly, whether he had success or not. I think he also got to benefit from the fact that Russell Wilson was at his true kind of short, real nice prime period that he had for about 3 years there, where he was at an MVP level where his lower legs had not left him yet. And he could still take advantage of the arm stuff and the leg stuff and be at his maximum. And that Schottenheimer did help probably Russ along a little bit there with that. It's not to undersell that part of it, but I don't want to overstate it either. And he's a very boring offensive coordinator. That's, Carroll didn't hire him because he's an exciting hire. He hired him because he was going to be a yes man and is going to run a boring offense. I don't want any part of that. I would just stay with Grubb if that was going to be the case. And to your point as well, and prior point is, yes, if you're going to pivot, go to a guy like they had Arthur Smith last year that was going to be their number one candidate.
Yeah.
A lot more along these lines. I'd expect them to do that if they do go this direction.
Did you name Doug Peterson? Was he one of the guys you named when you were talking about?
He was not, and that was on purpose.
Okay. Not a Peterson.
I'm not a Peterson. He's fired with the Eagles very quickly after they won a Super Bowl. He's not advanced and developed, in my opinion, Trevor Lawrence. I've not been impressed watching their offense with him there. So I one of those guys that was a former Reed guy that seems like kind of running a little bit off the shine of Reed to me, just a little bit.
Shout out to Propa for the super thanks. Appreciate that. As a Niners fan, just wanted to say thank you for keeping Gino as quarterback. You're welcome. Looks like my team is going to return the favor and pay Brock. Sadly, last place schedule next year could work out well for us, though. Some rare, objective, honest analysis from an opposing fan. Okay, a little non-Seahawk topic, although it affects the Seahawks certainly as they move forward. Are you paying Brock Purdy $55-60 million a year if you're Jed York?
No, I think that and this is where I'm at with quarterbacks right now. I think teams just get too much on, though. You got to pay him. You got to pay him. I think some of this is happening with us with Gino right now because you probably have to make a decision on paying him. I don't think you can run him back on the final year of his deal. So it's like a lot of the fan base would be like, well, you just got to pay him. You just got to just and I think, wait, no, why does this all got to be no-brainer stuff? Let's really think about it. And with Purdy, he's limited. There's some injury stuff that's worrisome there on the other side of it. I would, from a Niners standpoint perspective, no. When you start to pay that amount of money, I need a guy who's going to elevate the supporting cast, not expect the supporting cast to elevate him, which is going to be the need with Brock Purdy on that. So I hope the Niners do it. They'll put themselves in cap hell, which they're already heading towards anyway. You get a McCaffrey and a Williams, by the way, retiring. The Rams next year are spending on their cap for 2025 $33 million for Aaron Donald. Why? Because they pushed all that money down the line, base minimum salary minimum. We'll bury it all in not just bonus money, but in those guarantees that hit at certain escalator points of the contract. And now when the guy retires, he's even been retired for 2 years, you're still sitting on $33 million. And something similar happened with those two players, of course, Dan, because of the fact they just did re-up with them.
Yeah.
I missed that last message. What was that?
Missed one here. Angry Bucket with super thanks. What about Chip Kelly for offensive coordinator? He was interviewed last year, right? They met with the Seahawks, and then he decided to go to Ohio State and call plays there. He's a polarizing guy when it comes to being a play caller. What are your thoughts on him?
I'd be a no on that. You had him in the house. You interviewed him. You considered him, and you chose Grubb instead. So your initial pass of this was a no from the Seahawks standpoint through that. I also would say that this doesn't fit to what I want, which is a coordinator who's been in this league who's actually really had success. I know that he had some offensive success with the Eagles as a head coach for a moment, but he blew that team out. He pissed all those players off. It was not one that lasted throughout even the whole opening season there. And at the Niners, he didn't get anything done there either. So a guy that's not shown me that he can be a good play caller in this league consistently. And especially once you remove from him the hurry up nature of his offense, is now the recent years he's had to pull back the gas on his offense, which was the centerpiece point of it in its prime. And I think it's probably neutered some of his offense, but he had to do it at the same point in time.
Phobia asks if I can shred that Les Paul on my wall. It's actually a PRS, and no, I can't. I can play some power chords, but that's about it. Let me ask you this. So we just talked about Brock Purdy a little bit. Everyone's looking for the next Brock Purdy, especially a team like the Seahawks, where they're not going to be drafting high enough to get a shot at the two quarterbacks that might have a chance to contribute as rookies in this draft. So you're trying to find that next guy, the guy that has a ton of starts in college, that maybe flies under the radar, that might just need a little bit of development time left. But if you hit on him, could end up being a viable starter. In your early looks at this draft class, are there some guys after the first round that you see that you're intrigued by?
Yeah, there are. It's a little, I'm not blown away by him. I don't think that there's a Russell Wilson quite type like that in this draft, as far as third round guy that's you get who's quite that good, nor do you have a draft. Of course, with that draft, part of the reason you get Russell Wilson had to do with the fact that there were some good quarterbacks at the top of the draft that allowed for that to kind of sink down a little bit. The main couple guys that I'm looking at right now, or I would say that there's probably four guys, and I would say I wouldn't go with any of them in the second round. So I'm not pulling the second round. I don't want to, and I hope you'd be the same place. I don't want to reach in order to get the QB. I want to select him in the right spot, all like Russell, where you're able to sit in your spot, grab him at the right spot, and pluck a guy that's got some good value in that place. So this is third round for me on these guys. Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Dylan Gabriel, Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Those would be 4 guys with different skill sets, different upsides, different floors, but guys that could be in that capable, competent place that you talk about in a rookie deal.
Oh, I can't do another 5'10" quarterback, man.
Well, I mean, I'm not for Dylan necessarily, but at the point in time when you look at a Brock Purdy, for instance, and what Brock Purdy's done with San Francisco, what you're doing would be an equivalent thing here. So you're going, okay, you bring this guy in on the rookie quarterback contract. It's not about really his upside. Can he run a spread offense? Yeah, he can he? So I put him into a grub spread offense, and I got that guy on a rookie contract who's played a lot of college football, who's got a lot of those starts, so he's ready to go when he hits. To me, he's been like kind of a left-handed Tua. And so, yeah, he's undersized, but he's going to throw a lot of anticipation and quickly get the ball for being a guy that's a little bit of undersized guy. Yeah, you're going to run a little bit of a kitschy offense, but your quarterback position is going to be butt cheap. And if you build up that super team around him, maybe you can maximize that.
A couple of people in the chat saying Nussmeier's not coming out. I think that has been reported that he has said he's going to return. How about Will Howard? Have you watched much of him? He was a guy that I wasn't that impressed with at Kansas State other than his physical stature and athletic ability, but I think he was like 55% completions. And then he transfers to Ohio State. He's 72% completions, great touchdown to interception ratio. And I watched the Tennessee playoff game last week on the alternate broadcast where it's all through the sky cam, right? Mm-hmm. So you're seeing his point of view. Man, I thought he was making some layered throws. He was making some NFL seam throws. I thought it's a real easy delivery and arm strength. He looked to me like a guy, he's beloved in that locker room. He's got a real energy about him. I think he's a guy that would check the tilt the room box for John Schneider in that sense. Your thoughts on Howard?
Haven't done the deep dive on him. I mean, he's got some physical traits that are interesting there, and the accuracy stuff is maybe at the forefront that stands out a little bit. And with Kelly's offense, a lot of short throws in that offense, a lot of manufactured stuff in that, which is going to artificially raise your completion percentage just a little bit if it's not already done at the college level to a degree. So I'm not sure if he's necessarily fixed those things, but that's also something that can be somewhat correctable. We saw Josh Allen fix that from a 50% completion percentage coming out of Wyoming. So he's interesting. I got to do a little bit of more of a deep dive on him, though, to be honest with you. I haven't really gone in and really dived through the tape with him.
It's fascinating because some of these guys, I'm surprised we haven't heard anything yet. Now, some of it's because they're playing in the playoffs, like in the case of Quinn Ewers. He might have made a decision, and he's just, he's going to play out the string and try to win a national championship. But a guy like Jalen Milroe, to me, he's a guy that needs to stay in school. Probably needs to go spend another year with Kalen DeBoer, and maybe he can sprinkle some of that Michael Penix magic on him because he does have some traits. But yet we haven't heard anything. Quinn Ewers has always been fascinating to me because John Schneider name dropped him a couple of years ago after they drafted JSN. He just randomly started talking about Quinn Ewers, and he did it in a way where I thought he's already watching Quinn Ewers, isn't he? And he just. Yeah. There's a swagger that Ewers has and the style of play that I think would appeal to Schneider. He has his detractors. He's certainly a guy that can have bouts of inconsistencies in his accuracy. He can throw the ball away, make some maddening plays from time to time. But he also, for the most part, when I watch him play in, play out, just looks like a guy that's real natural playing the quarterback position. And some things come easy to him, but I can see both sides of it. If he were to come out this year, where would you place him?
I'm one of those anti-Quinn Ewers guys. I've been watching him for a couple of years and listened to the way that people talk about him, and I don't think that the tape quite fits to the way that people speak about him. I've heard of people try to make reference of him having like an Aaron Rodgers-like delivery. I don't see that myself. The Texas office with Steve Sarkisian is highly scripted up. It's got a lot of similarities to kind of like the Tennessee offense. And when you're looking at evaluating these quarterbacks and offenses, it's a little bit to the Chip Kelly point on Will Howard. When you're in these offenses that are highly manufactured for success for the quarterback, not a lot of progression reading, quick throws instantaneously from the second that you get the snap. Well, now you only have so many throws that you get to really evaluate them through the game that are legit throws where they are making those progression reads, where they got to process a little bit in the pocket. The two things I look for with any quarterback prospect that I start with on quarterback prospects that I'm looking for is two centerpiece attributes within their game: arm strength, processing. Those are the two. There's other things you want, but I need to have those two for any guy that I want on my team into the future. Because if you don't have it, I don't think you can develop it. And when I look at Ewers, I see a guy that does not process within the pocket. Heavily scripted. The second I get him out of the heavily scripted stuff, he's lost in the sauce. Add on top of it the fact that he's not mobile at all. all. And then you've got a little bit of an injury history on the other side of it on top of it. And that's a layer cake that I don't want to take a bite out of.
Okay. Kevin O'Connell, head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, jumping into the chat. Says he likes the Mike McDaniel idea, but doesn't know if he'll vibe with McDonald. I just couldn't, if that were to happen. And first of all, the Dolphins are still in the playoff race. So if they win next week and make the playoffs, I don't think he's going anywhere. But I just wouldn't be able to handle having to reconcile Mike McDaniel, Mike McDonald all the time.
Amen. But boy, he got he'd be super like, what's up? We're gonna run this offense, we're just gonna do it, man. All right. No, I can't see it as being a fit with the personality types either. Mike's so intense and locked in, and shark eyes, and you got McDaniel's just complete the opposite. But it's more of just I think there's a lot of different OCs I think that can do this job. It's about though finding that one that is done this before and knows what he's doing, and it's not going to be a finding his way, learning how to swim first time on the job kind of vibe.
Or as Kevin suggests, what if we went with ChatGPT?
It's the way of the future, brother.
For the way of the future, right? At what point is a team going to save a couple $1 million and do that, right? And just dial up, literally. That would give whole new meaning to the term dial up a play.
Yeah, I had somebody asking me a similar question, like when is AI going to take over drafts? And probably at some point, some point it'll probably be smarter than because it's like they say with the consensus boards tend to be the smart boards, right? Like if you take 1,000 people run a draft board. And where that draft board fits out to, those players and where they go is going to be a lot more accurate versus any general manager in the league individually.
Thomas Cox says, honestly, I think Seattle will wait till 2026 for a QB in that class. Now, I wanted to put this comment up because this is something that we talk about every year. And it's one of the reasons that I have changed my mindset on this. As I mentioned earlier, I think they need to start being aggressive and drafting a guy every year at some point. Every single year until you hit on one. And the reason is because NIL has changed everything. And the transfer portal has changed everything. And every single year I catch myself looking ahead. I did this last year. Wait, guys, this isn't the right draft for it. Next year's going to be better. And then half those guys end up staying in school, not coming out or not living up to expectations or whatever. And I think that's a dangerous game to start looking ahead, right? People will say, wait for Arch. Well, first of all, there's no guarantee he's going to develop into a prospect or be the guy that you think he is just because of his pedigree. But also, if he does, you're going to have the worst record in the league to have a shot at him because he's going to go probably top 3. I just think that's a dangerous game when you start waiting for the future. So you got to start taking bites at the apple.
I would agree with you to a degree. I don't know if I'm fully on board on take it every year. It's to me that value thing that's got to fixed up to it. Because to me, on my opinion on this in recent years, there just hasn't been the guy there for John to draft. And that spot where we've been sitting in the right place. I just haven't felt that vibe of like, you should have taken that QB right there that you missed out on. I don't think that he's missed out on anybody. I think he's been, I think, proven correct in his approach to which guys he's avoided, through this process on it. So I get where you're coming from. I'm not anti it. The one thing to consider is you have Gino and Sam here. You draft another quarterback. That's 3 guys you have to have on the active roster. You got to be sure about that guy as a development guy if you do that because you're pulling from another place. Game day, 53 men can only be active. There's a bit of a certainty that you got to make on the decision. What do you think about the possibility, or Dan, of running a Godfather offer up? And I know I've mentioned a couple guys on this. We've heard potentially a guy might be on the market. People don't want to think this is even happening. But more than it being about a specific guy on this one, Dan, I want you to more think about it conceptually because people get caught up on the guy. There's no way they'll do this. There's no way that team will do that.
Right.
Conceptually, if you have a Trevor Lawrence or a Joe Burrow type that does suddenly become on the open market, would you make a Godfather offer to them in lieu of what you just talked about? You're not likely to be picking up at the top of the draft with this team as it's structured. There's not a lot of pathway to get that future quarterback.
If a guy like that became available, absolutely. Yeah. I'm not doing it for Lawrence because I don't think he's an elite quarterback. I just think he's plateaued. I never really saw it even when he was at Clemson. In some fantasy world, if Joe Burrow were to say, I want out of Cincinnati and become available, I'd throw the kitchen sink and then some at it. Do everything you can to get that guy if they become available. We saw the Seahawks do that once when they sat on the tarmac in Denver.
Yeah,
on the airplane, hoping to meet with Peyton Manning during his free agency tour.
But you go beyond. You like because that's what I'm talking about. That's that one where it's like after we hear the trade capital, we go, oh God, but we go. I'm with you. I'd be like, but hey,
let me give you this one then. Let me give you this one. If Sam Darnold were to hit the free agency market, I would prefer Sam. I would, as a GM, if I have a 35, 36-year-old quarterback, even one that I think very highly of, and he has 1 year left on his deal, and a 27-year-old playing at the level that Sam Darnold's playing at, if you were to hit the open market where all it would cost is money to sign him, then I'm going after Sam Darnold. Because
50 million?
I think that's an opportunity to reset that position, much younger, and a guy that I think can play at a little higher level in the red zone anyway. We've seen that from him. And I would do it, depending on the money, obviously, but I would do it. I've been saying for weeks, when people, criticize me for being such a Gino apologist, I guess is the term, is that if his contract was expiring this year and he and Darnold were both free agents, I would choose Darnold over him.
I think you're on steady ground there with that. I'd be in the same place of it. I don't want to do the deal with Darnold, though, because I believe that he's going to get paid more than I want to pay him, because of the fact that he is the only belle of the ball, and that there's going to be 4 or 5 teams that are going to be, trying to woo him in because there's no other options for those teams.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be that team overpaying in a, buyer's market from his standpoint, basically, and that's what I worry about there with it. But I can completely get that as far as making a lot of sense as far as a pivot about the age and cost being kind of similar, all things being equal on that side of it too.
But they're not letting him get out of Minnesota.
They love JJ McCarthy a lot. And
I don't know if they get bounced in the first round, but if they make a deep playoff run, you can't that'd be risky.
I'm with you on that. It's not an easy decision for him, but you just drafted JJ McCarthy. What are you going to do? You're going to sign this guy to the $50 million a year, and then you're going to say, JJ, you're sitting through your whole rookie deal. I mean, And if you try to move JJ McCarthy, his value is going to be at its lowest. You might get like a late second rounder at this point. He's had 2 surgeries this year on that knee. I think that they probably let him go. I mean, you're right. And that I'm not saying it's easy, but I just go, you've already kind of made your bet on this one. You got to sleep in it.
I mean, if I'm the GM there, the one thing I'm not doing is just letting him walk into free agency. I mean, if you have conviction about JJ McCarthy, and Kevin O'Connell has said that he does, I mean, what was his quote after he got hurt, that he, they saw enough to know that he's the guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tagging Darnold, trying to trade him, trying to get value for him.
But then, I mean, that's also if you can get a deal done and tagging him and trade. And you're right, maybe you can pull something like that off. That'd be a potential way that they could go with it.
You risk getting stuck with that.
Yeah, you risk getting stuck for a team that could be ready to be injected to push themselves over the top in a very competitive division right now, where there's 3 teams that are really good teams duking it out. So you better hold on to your sack if you do that kind of move, and be real sure with it that there's going to be that team that's going to jump.
Here's one Bryce and I talked about last night, and here's Bryce bringing it up again. Hendon Hooker as a possibility. I don't think that the Lions are going to move off of him. Goff being on the other side of 30 now, I think. Is he? Has he turned
something there? Yeah. If he's not there, he's right close to there.
But even on a broader level, like the idea of trying to replicate the Matt Hasselbeck concept, right? Where you find a guy that's stuck somewhere. We talked about Hooker last night, and I brought up Tyson Bagent potentially in Chicago. He's looked really good when he's gotten opportunities in the preseason. Is there somebody like Hooker or somebody else out there you can think of that might be stuck behind a quarterback that's not going anywhere, that you might, if you're John Schneider, pick up the phone and try and aggressively pry away?
There's nobody that I have in my outlook of wanting to pry away. Hendon Hooker's a fine prospect, but like you just said, there's no way at all that the Detroit Lions are going to move Hendon Hooker. It's a 0% chance of a trade. And I don't typically say this, but you're paying Goff all of that money. What do you want when you're paying with your backup quarterback and you're paying that number 1 guy? You want a talented guy behind him who's dirt cheap. That's what they got right now. They have their ideal situation for how they want to counter this to Jared. Say nothing of the fact of a guy that if they don't like what they see with Jared and he diminishes, they can potentially pivot to in the next 2 years. I think he's got 2 years left on his rookie deal. So I don't see why there's any place where Detroit would make that trade. And here's the thing. I love your reference to Matt. I didn't like, in retrospect, the Matt Hasselbeck trade. Because to my opinion, what you had with Holmgren with a guy when he was with Green Bay was Brett Favre, a difference-making talent at the position, and look what he could take that team to do. Look what he could take that offense to do when he had that at that position. Versus when you went with Matt, who was a little bit diminished below Brett, who didn't quite have that skill set, and in my opinion, had some limitations that he brought to the position with it. I think we've got to seek a little bit higher for the quarterback position if we're looking for that guy into the future, in my opinion. I'm looking for a little more upside. I don't want to be just satisfied with the high floor.
501st rejected said he wouldn't be any good behind this line anyway. Let's wrap up with this. I want to put you on the spot because this is going to be, we've detailed 5 or 6 main storylines, I think, going into this offseason. And certainly one of them, the biggest one at the top of that list, is going to be, how do they fix this offensive line? Be specific with me. Of the 5 that started the season and finally got to play together for, what was it, the last 6 or 7 seasons, right? Left to right, you go Cross, Tomlinson, Oluwatimi, Lamea, and then Abe Lucas, who was able to, once he did come back, was able to be counted on, play in, play out. How many of those 5 are you keeping? And then how are you going about filling the spots that you'd like to change out?
Well, Lucas and Cross are set to be your pillars in the future, and Lucas seems to be back healthy.
You think he's back to where you can?
I think he's back where you try. I do
some
of this is it's got to come in from where their standpoint on their background knowledge of his injury, right? Like, we don't know. You and I are kind of like blind on this one as far as exactly where's that knee at? Is it every time you get on the field, is it like ow, 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 right. Or is it that you're actually able to flow out there and it's 100% back to good? On the interior 3 pieces at this point, I'm a person that says we got to change our ways on this. Can it go through the last few off seasons? We've wanted to kind of just, well, this guy will just develop. It'll magically happen. It'll magically occur. We haven't seen it, but it will magically occur. I don't want to do that. So Haynes, Oluwatimi, Bradford, great depth pieces. Throw them in there with Mike Jarrell. Great depth pieces. You got to rebuild the 3 interior parts of this offensive line this offseason. Oluwatimi went in for Connor Williams, and he did not perform up to where even Connor Williams was performing at. And there's a reason that they had to go make the Connor Williams signing in the first place. It wasn't because they were happy with the development they were seeing from Oluwatimi, right. And Grubb's spoken to this himself. So I'm be great if those guys could develop into the future to become starters. You can't count on it, brother. They haven't given you the baseline to do it. You're doing a lot of projection on where you saw them and how you drafted them versus what they've shown you on the field they can do. That should not be how we operate as far as rebuilding this line, in my opinion. Not if we want to do it right.
Yeah. I know it's a small sample size, but did you see anything that you liked or enough to give you an idea in that Packer game of what Jalen Sundell might be able to bring to the competition?
No, it's a depth guy. He moves pretty well out there, but we've short sold this positional group for so many years. It's been like a league worst group, league worst pass protection, league worst run blocking. And it's because you're not putting good enough talent out there. You're overinflating your own guys in your house of your opinion of them. And that's coloring this thing wrongly, in my opinion. And this is where it's got to be a course correction, in my opinion. And you got to be really strongly on this, or else we're going to make that same mistake, I think.
Angry Bucket says draft Tyler Booker and Tate Ratledge. Interior will be better. Boom, done. Fixed it, right? But Booker's an interesting guy, and he's a guy that seems to be slotting in around where they're going to pick in the first round, kind of.
Would you be mad? Would you be mad if let's say Booker's got a 2nd round grade? Seahawks are picking 18th or 19th. Would you be upset if Booker was the pick then at 19 where they just said, look, we can't move back. Safest left guard in the draft. We're going to overdraft him by a half a round. But does that make you mad? Or you go, hey, I understand. I get it.
Nope. Not if it addresses a need. If a glaring need like that, especially in a draft where, they're going to be able to come out after that first round and say, hey, we only had 10 first round grades, and we just didn't want to risk losing this guy. We hear them say that about guys when they come out for those post-draft kind of breakdowns. They'll say, this was a guy that we, had at the top of our board, and we just didn't think he was going to get to the next spot. They'll almost come out and outright admit that they overdraft guys sometimes because they liked him so much and didn't want to risk losing him. I think he's a guy, from what I've seen so far, and again, I'm still far away from where I will be in a couple of months on study, but he's a guy that it's everything you're looking for in a left guard. He's just nasty and physical and buries guys into the ground. He's good enough in pass protection. He's got long arms. He's big. He's what they don't have now. He can move people off the football. He's played in a big conference at a high level, big games, all of that stuff that John Schneider values. So
agreed. That's my assessment of him as well. I don't think he's quite a dominating type to where good enough to get the first round typically of a left guard, but still right there on that line, right there on that edge.
When I'm doing mock drafts these days, it typically goes one of 3 ways. It's either Booker, or it's sometimes Kelvin Banks, but I would move him inside.
Mm-hmm.
And then, or it's the top defensive player, a guy that I think can be a game wrecker, a Shamar Turner, or a guy like that. That's just that you really can't pass up. And then I'm circling back around trying to hit offensive line on day 2, which can be done. I mean, we talked about the Packers and, guards, especially interior guys. Day 2 is sort of the sweet spot for that position group. So if Lucas can really be counted on, and you make a great point, the Seahawks may know something medically where they may have been approaching this the whole time as if we just, we're going to get a half season out of him and that's it. If they were to move on from him, we'll know about the knee, but it sure looks like he continues to get stronger and he looks natural and we can count on him. And if that's the case, it does make it quote unquote easier for them if they want to lean into the draft to address this position, because those guys typically are good ones are available on day 2.
And you might be able to do it where you could move back into like 19 to 27. You pick up the 3rd, you grab Booker there, you package your 2 3s, you get back into 2, you get another lineman there where it's significant quality at that point. So there's a way to kind of roll this. And Ratlich is nice too. He's mean potatoes, right guard, good heavy hands, good physicality. Maybe not the movement necessarily look for, but 3rd roundish or whatever round in that era. It's good.
And fits the profile that they need. Give me a guy that's played at a big program and big games and was highly recruited and had to deal with the spotlight and's gotten some NIL money, all of that. A guy you can just plug in. Like Mike Jarrell has some upside, Jalen Sundell has some upside, some of those guys do, but let's take some sure things for sure. And then, I've got over the cap up here. As I said earlier, it's kind of Trey Smith or bust. It's not necessarily the case. James Daniels,
Tevin Jenkins, maybe.
Jones, where the kid out of Miami that I know was
Robert Jones.
Yeah, Robert Jones was connected to the Seahawks, I think, in that draft. And when he came out, there's some guys there.
Tevin Jenkins too.
Tevin Jenkins, yep.
He's possibly a little bit of an injury problem, but I like Tevin a lot because of the fact that he is that tackle convert to guard at the pro level. And with him, it's just been a little bit of some injury stuff. It's not been horrible. And he's been a good, well-graded guy all the way around as a player, who might not cost quite as much. But if they want to throw $20 million a year at Trey Smith, I'm not going to have a problem doing that, to be honest with you.
No, isn't that kind of, if they were to make one move this offseason, that would kind of be the home run, right? They would solidify the fan base and make people the happiest. Like Seahawks give 120, 5 years, $120 million to Trey Smith. Boom, done. I think that would be probably the quickest way that John Schneider could change perception about the job he's done.
Well, I think you can do a 2-for-1 with this too as well. You might have been the one who referenced doing this initially back a couple months ago, even, if I'm not mistaken on this. But you also then can take Mr. Haynes and put him into center. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I wonder is on the table. They played him there at the Senior Bowl, and there were some teams I remember in the draft process that were looking at him as a center. Yeah. I don't know.
And if you can do that, then you got him and Olatimi. You're kind of set there center. You got Trey Smith, the right guard, with Sato and Bradford in the mix still there. And then you just got to take care of left guard. And suddenly now a really big thing to try to figure out and take care of is really far down the line there. If you can kind of make those kind of 2 changes there.
Yeah. Draft one guy, sign another, and you can spend some money doing it. You can make the argument certainly that they can afford to put their resources and go after a big fish in free agency on the offensive line, because there aren't other positions that are as gaping of a need, right? And they can afford to do it. They can make it work.
You don't have to do anything with really
that. Then let's not, even if they still have something left in the tank, let's stop with the revolving door of the veterans, as you touched on earlier. Let's not do Kevin Zeitler. Let's not do Brandon Scherf. Let's no more 34, 35-year-olds.
Yeah.
On 1-year deals. Let's
it's not worked.
Find a solution.
It's Luke Jokel, Austin Blythe, Evan Brown, Gabe Jackson. I mean, it's over and over and over. You've tried to go that approach and path, and it's not worked. It's not just been a 1-year try deal. So let's stop it. That's not making this happen. That's not making this go. And you can afford it. Your point to the defense as well. Very likely you don't have to potentially spend any money in free agency, defensively speaking. If you can find that nose tackle in the draft, if you want to go draft a couple of cornerbacks, if you don't cut as maybe like a Uchenna just stays on, but you only cut a Draymond and you're cutting a Tyler Lockett on the receiving side. Now really the focus can in many ways be shifted. And I think, finally so. Not because you just are blindly going, we hope the defense will come forward. Talent's there on that defense. You can see where the guys are locked. Your safeties with Love and Bryant seem to be centered in well. Your interior linebackers, I'm expecting Jones to be signed to an extension. You're set there. So I think that there's going to be less work to have to be done there on the surface of it too with the defense. Frees you up.
I mean, I'm glad you named some of that stuff off, because I think, just to wrap this up on a high note, I think there is, there are several positives to the season. I do feel better about this team now than I did at the beginning of the season, certainly with what we saw the first 6 weeks. But they found some players, right? I've used the term all season long about checking boxes. They've checked some boxes, and Josh Jobe might be one of those guys. You named him. Kobe Bryant, I think, has been a revelation, and a guy that you probably want to move forward with. And gosh, he's going into his 4th year. He might be in line for an extension this offseason.
Wouldn't shock me, man. He's got 3 picks, but he had another interception this last week, wiped off the board. He's had 3 other interceptions. Poor guy, by the way. 5 interceptions in his career in his limited playing time, wiped off the board for penalties that had nothing to do with him.
Brutal. Yeah. Like him in the run game too. I mean, he's been great.
Yeah. He's been really good. No, he's been on. And what a guy to root for a guy's not been given an easy route to find success, having to move 3 different positions. But I feel perfectly fine with him moving in the future. Say nothing, you still have Jared Reed and kind of the mix back there too. See what they do with Rashawn Jenkins, who may be a guy they cut or not, comes in. Maybe you got still some depth to go with as well there.
Yeah, another guy with unguaranteed money left on his deal. They could easily
release
that. Final thing. We've been talking for an hour and a half as if the season's over. It's not. They have a game left on Sunday. What do you want to see from them on Sunday? Is there anything they could do Sunday that would influence your opinion on where they're at one way or another? Or is it all just kind of, they are who they are?
I think it's all pretty much kind of set to where it is at this point. We've learned about this team, and we have 17 games that they've run through. So it's one final game. We'll see how many he's playing or not playing, or if they're. I mean, I'd like them to kind of protect teams. I don't really want to have some guy that's a part of the future right now get torn ACL because you tried him out there. And I mean, if you sat Leonard Williams in this game and you rocked with Byron Murphy at the 3 tech 24/7, I don't think anybody's crying about that. Yeah. I would hope that they would take a little bit of that position in this game of, rather than we got to go get this win of let's rest some guys. It's been a long year for certain guys. Certain guys may be banged up, dinged up. Let them sit. Let's roll with what we got. If we don't need this win, it's okay to do that. So let's see if they take that approach, but that'd be the main thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, play Christian Haynes at left guard.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no need to run Laken Tomlinson out there one more time. He's not going to be part of the roster next year. You're moving on from, I'd like to see some moves like that. I don't think they're going to do it at quarterback, despite our discussion earlier, but yeah. All right, man. This was great. Thanks for,
we got one more donation there from Dogzilla.
What we got? Let's make sure we put the cap. Here we go. Could the Hawks upgrade the team music to Creed? Good one to end on. I mean,
with arms wide open.
Why wouldn't you? Creed has finally put Seattle on the next leg of their tour. They're going to be here in November during the football season. I think it's a weekend. Maybe they can have Scott Stapp raise the flag, right?
I'm with it. I'm over. They're not doing the Bittersweet Symphony anymore, right?
Mark Tremonti raise the flag.
There we go.
Autographed Mark Tremonti guitar right there.
Let's go.
You can never go wrong with Creed. Thank you.
Well, I'm done with Bittersweet Symphony. So if we can cut that one out, I don't know if they're still playing that in the stadium, but I would do Creed 7 days a week and twice on Sunday over the Bittersweet Symphony.
I did think it was interesting. And maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I noticed a change this year at the stadium where they were leaning a lot heavier into rock music. It wasn't as much techno and R&B and some of that stuff.
I'm glad to hear it. We should.
Maybe it was, all the new subwoofers they installed this year. They wanted to get the most out of them.
I love it. I love it, man. We should. And we got this musical kind of pedigree there that should be put to work in that stadium.
That's Brandon Kane from the Hawks Nest. What do you got coming up?
Just a week of be on the NFC West Roundtable, little separate channel I do on Tuesdays, chopping it up with some NFC West folks, do content creation like we do. We got the weekly roundup on Wednesday, the B&B show on Thursday. So load it up. We'll be doing a behind enemy lines with Rams content creator here this week too. So a lot cooking.
All right. Let's do this. Always have to, speaking of music, got to end on something.
And let me also say too, if folks listen on my end, if you're tuning in from my side of it, please do get over to Seahawks Forever on Dan's side of it and make sure you are subbed up. I'm sure you are already, but if you're not, please do get subbed up over there on his side of it.
Appreciate it. Same. Hop right over and do the same for Brandon. Also be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up, all that.
We had a couple more donations, by the way, brother. Sorry. This is what happens to me, man. Everybody asks me always like, how do you go 6-7 hours? I'm like, hey, the donations just keep rolling through.
Okay, I mean, here's Mark Sanchez. We've had a star-studded lineup. Mark Sanchez joining the chat. Thanks for the super chat. I love hypotheticals. Here we go. If the Patriots have the first overall pick, should the Hawks sell out to get that pick or trade for May? Well, first of all, the second part of that, the Patriots aren't trading May. I think they've seen enough from him to know that he's a guy you can build around this year, right?
Yeah. I would say May's not going any chance.
Go from 18 to 1.
It's going to take you probably 2 first-round picks and 2 seconds, or 2 first-round picks, a second and a third in future years. I think both of these two.
Sonny Weaver on that one.
Yeah, I didn't get Sonny in the house. I'm not big on these 2 quarterbacks going at the top of this draft. Yeah. I liked Ward, but I liked Ward more late first, more than we're talking top 5. That starts to make my butt itch. Shedeur Sanders just has a lot of red flags to me as far as standing out to him. And it's not necessarily from just his talent's okay. It's not that great of a talent. It's like arms a little better than average, mobility is a little better than average maybe, but there's not a lot of wow factor there for a guy that you're taking number 1 overall, much less giving up all those picks to have the opportunity to do so. If it had been more of a maybe last year kind of draft, I'd be willing to do it, but not this year's draft.
Yeah. Feed me more Seahawks. Thank you. Nose tackle's a priority. Who's available free agency and draft? Not sure on free agency, but as you mentioned earlier, it's a solid draft for bigger interior defensive tackles. Mason Graham, obviously, he's going to go high. He's going to be a top 5 pick, probably, as he should be. His teammate Kenneth Grant has announced he's coming out. He's another guy. Is it Deion Walker from Kentucky? There's some 330, 340 pound dudes this year.
Yeah, Nazir Stackhouse, Georgia. If you want to go, how about Daryl Jackson's son? You want to go Daryl Jackson's son out there? Daryl Jackson Jr.?
Daryl Jackson has a son that's
a nose tackle, huh?
Yeah.
He's a big boy. He's a big boy. He's a big boy down there out there in Florida. So, there's some nose tackles in this draft. Yeah. Sadly, my guy, Deontay Corleone, decided to go back to school. That was kind of my guy. I love that player. I've been watching for a couple of years. Yeah. Cincinnati. Okay. But, there's guys. I don't think there's much in free agency, but there is in the draft. And what stands out about this draft with nose tackle, every other year I've been covering the draft here, you have about 2 nose tackles every single draft. Like last year it was Tavondre Sweat and there's one guy other than that. But every year it's this way where there's just 1 or 2 dudes. This year you actually got, I think, about 4 or 5 guys picked between 2nd to the 5th round who could be functional for you in that role. So a good year for this to have the nose tackle. A lot of those
bust too. Like the hit rate on those bigger defensive tackles is not very good.
Oh yeah, it's hard to get him.
Be calm, see clearly. None of my super chats were read today. All right, let's go back. My apologies. Let's do a little rehash here. Who did I miss? Be calm. Here we go. Sorry for missing you. Something has to give. Not just Gino, DK, K9, Fant. The tedious O-line choices, etc. Offensive coordinator, special teams coordinator. Go Hawks, go Bucks. Time to hunt some ducks. Okay.
Ooh.
I think we pretty much, if that's a checklist, I think we
didn't we? I think Be Calm, you touch on, just to maybe touch on more than the individual parts, the overall look of it. I think Be Calm, this is where I get slid a little bit at times to saying 2025 is kind of more of a year to fix things up because of the fact that there is both at the same time, there's not as much to do and there's a lot to do because there's a lot to do at very important positions. And then you have keynote decisions on guys you got to pay money to. So it's kind of a weird thing where it's both this and it's that. And it is, yes, you're kind of close, but it is also, but you're kind of far away. And so it makes it hard, I think, in looking at this offseason and what to do. But there's a lot of work actually kind of here to do when you really boil it all down into what you got to do. There's things taken care of. You're on the right path. This year was a success, but Be Calm, you're right. You've got stuff you've got to get cinched up here. And it's not just 1, 2, 3. It's more like 7, 8, 9, 10.
Be calm, see clearly. Also, 2 of the 3 home wins were against the Cardinals, a team that we've seen now. You know, we kind of know who they are and weren't as good as they thought they were going into their bye and getting ready to take us on. Team no-showed 3 to 4 games this year, but I do believe in Iron Mike. You touched on it earlier. One thing that the Seahawks have to be encouraged by when they look ahead to 2025, the schedule certainly looks like it's going to be more forgiving this year. That they went 3-8 or 3-6 at home, right? I got the math right on that.
Yeah.
But 6-1 so far, chance to go 7-1 on the road. The better opponents were at home. Certainly you're playing some of the elite teams in the league. You're playing Buffalo and Minnesota and the Packers and the 49ers even at the time. But next year they get the AFC South. So you're talking about some rebuilding teams and teams that are going to be changing out coaches. Jacksonville, Tennessee, Carolina. Those are all on the road. Interestingly enough, we get the Houston Texans at home. We also get the Colts, Saints, and Bucks at home next year. We go on the road again to Atlanta, and then 3 games as yet to be determined will be determined after the results of this weekend. At home, NFC North. So it would be the NFC North second place team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now that'd be the Detroit Lions. It'd be fun to get them here for a change. That would be cool. And then on the road, NFC East, which right now would be Dolphins. No, that's AFC East. NFC East. Who's second place in the NFC East?
Is it AFC East? I thought it was NFC
East.
North. I thought it was AFC North.
AFC North and NFC East
are
okay. Remaining away.
Oh, NFC. Okay. So Washington.
Pittsburgh right now.
So it'd be the Commanders in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Little reunion with Dan Quinn if things stay that way. So, and then hopefully they won't get 6 games scheduled next year against teams coming off buys. That would be nice.
That would be nice. I think we had a pretty good overall schedule set up well this year, though. I mean, other than the 3 games in 11 days, which was brutal, that was the part that I really hated about this schedule. And that really hurt us this year, I think, in setting us back with having to run that many games. But it is an easier schedule to make headway with. I mean, that's the bottom line of it. So, yeah, well said there, Be Calm.
Carmelo King, thank you. Drop Tyler Lockett, get Waddle from Miami, or get CD or Chris Godwin. Thoughts for wide receiver 3? Well, if you trade DK, you're talking wide receiver 2 now. Do you have any question that Tyler Lockett's not on this roster next year? I think he's set to retire. I think he's ready to move on with the next phase of his life. And they're going to do the Doug Baldwin thing. They'll technically release him. They'll agree he's not going to have to pay back any of his signing bonus or anything.
Right.
And he'll end up retiring it. He's not going to play for someone else.
I foresee him moving on here at this point. He's just got too much of a cap hit. You can save too much and you need the cap space. On top of the fact that wherever he's at as far as diminished skill set, Tyler Lockett's really not a fit for this offense. One of the reasons this offense has had an issue with getting rolling is it's an offense that's going to require 2 different things from its receivers: yak and contested catchability. We are 31st or 32nd in the NFL right now in contested catchability. And part and parcel of that is a Tyler Lockett that's got kind of a reduced down catching radius zone more than ever before for a guy that's 5'9" with kind of shorter arms. And so you got to go a different direction here, unfortunately. A Waddle type would be like that, but I don't know how you can pull that off where you have a DK signing and then you're signing a Waddle on top of it and you still have to find money for the offensive line and probably not be able to pull that off. Godwin, I can't go with either because he's just coming off the ACL. So I feel for the guy, but he's got a major rehab undertaken and I'm not spending money to do that. Or I'd rather go for a guy that's healthier.
If there was any doubt that Tyler is contemplating retirement, last week the wide receiver tight end group got together for a holiday dinner, and they exchanged gifts. And most of them, there's a lot of PlayStations and Louis Vuitton bags and things like that changing hands. They got Tyler a putter.
There you go.
And that's what you buy someone who's about to retire. That's a retirement.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and it seems that way. Can you hold on 1 second? Just bear with me 2 seconds.
Yep. Feed me more Seahawks thoughts on rumors that Mike McCarthy stays. Man, you look around the NFL and so many ownership groups are impatient. It's crazy to me how Jerry Jones is sort of the opposite of that. Like he just continues to stay with guys. They have all the built-in excuses that they could want. You lose your quarterback to injury. You had some issues at running back, and you lose Micah Parsons for half a season, your best player. But they got some decisions to make there too. They gotta pay Parsons. They gotta find some help on offense. They need some complementary weapons next to CeeDee Lamb there. And it's this too. We talked about this in regards to the quarterback situation, that you need to have an alternative. If you move off a guy, you have to have, where are you going to turn, right? The alternative could be that you make the wrong choice and then that you're in for a world of hurt for years, right? You pick the wrong quarterback, you could be mired in that cycle for a long time. Same with head coaches. And every year, I'm not so sure. Like you look at last year, I think the Seahawks got really fortunate they were able to get Mike McDonald. I think he was one of the best, if not the best, in that coaching cycle. We'll find out about Ben Johnson, but
sorry about that, my man.
No, you're good. Just addressing the question here on Mike McCarthy potentially staying in Dallas. And I was making the point that you have to ask yourself what the alternatives are. You look at last year's coaching cycle, and outside of the couple of guys that got jobs, what were the alternatives? We were interviewing Bobby Slowick a second time. We were interviewing Daniel Graham from the Raiders. Like nobody's talking about that guy as a head coaching candidate. So they're just, if you're a team kind of on the cusp, like the Cowboys, you're trying to decide which way to go, like sticking with your head coach might not be the worst choice, because what else is there out there really?
The other thing to consider with this is that the Cowboys have a hard time of getting grade A head coaching hires in there because of the fact that their owners are general managers. And very few coaches want to sign up for that because you're signing yourself up for what's probably guaranteed to be a failure of a situation. And so to your point on that, yeah, not a lot on the open market, but especially not so given the situation is not the most attractive for coaches to walk into in there.
Yeah. All right. I think that does it for us. Thanks to Brandon for hopping on the show. Follow us both on all the social media, subscribe to our channels and all of that stuff. If you want to help send me to the Senior Bowl, that link is down below as well. Got a little modest GoFundMe there to help with some expenses. Bring back a whole bunch of draft content for you guys. Until then, forever and always go Hawks. Thanks again, Brandon. Really appreciate it. We'll see you all soon.
Anytime. Go Hawks.